Hey guys, imagine waking up in the dead of winter, your breath crystallizing in midair, your nose running frozen snot into your beard, and you're expected to scrub down like it's a Mediterranean spa day. Sounds delightful, right? Well, buckle up, because today we're diving into the frosty horrors of personal hygiene in months so cold your teeth chatter just thinking about water. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. In the year 924, in a tiny Norse settlement tucked against the ice-choked fjords of what we now call Norway, Olav the Unwashed rolled out of his straw mattress, actually more like a pile of hay flecked with rat droppings, and winced at the sight of his breath freezing mid-exhale. Fresh? Not exactly. But hygiene? Forget it. Running water in sub-zero temperatures was a joke, and boiling a cauldron of water over barely any firewood was a luxury only chieftains could afford. For Olaf and his fellow villagers, the mere thought of a full body wash was akin to plotting an expedition to the sun. Instead, they relied on something called dry bathing, an art perfected by rubbing handfuls of coarse sand or crushed lichen over their skin, hoping to scrape away the grime accumulated from months of butchering seal, repairing battered longships, and generally living like highly unbathed penguins. It was the medieval equivalent of a gritty sugar scrub, except instead of leaving your skin glowing and rejuvenated, you ended up looking like a flour-dusted snowman who'd spent the night face-planting in a frozen crater. And those who dared to moan about the sand stuck in every nook and cranny were met with hearty laughter, and the reminder that, at least you're not a Roman noble rotting away in a hot bath. Speaking of Romans, let's pivot south, way south, to the Byzantine Empire circa 1073, where Emperor Constantine Monomachos tried, and spectacularly failed, to maintain both an empire and his personal cleanliness. He commissioned elaborate heated baths in Constantinople, fed by aqueducts that froze over in winter. Imagine grand marble tubs filled with what was essentially lukewarm slush. Nobles would slip and crack their heads on the marble lip, then leap out, blue-lipped and shivering, only to wrap themselves in heavy furs and hold court. The term brain freeze had a literal meaning back then. When those aqueducts iced up, courtiers resorted to standing around massive cauldrons of steaming water, sort of a medieval communal sauna, except without the sauna and without the fun. Instead, you drip water down your back, desperately trying to rinse off the layer of sweat, mud, and elephant dung, a prized gardening fertilizer, apparently popular in Byzantine gardens, that had accumulated over weeks. Hair washing? Forget it. Hair was greased with a concoction of olive oil and crushed rose petals to keep lice at bay, but it also attracted dust, soot, and God knows what else. When winter winds blew through the palace, those locks became a walking, talking lint roller. Meanwhile, in feudal Japan around 1200 CE, samurai hygiene took a more ritualistic turn. While the art of the bath, ofuro, was well known, in winter it was reserved for special occasions, like a princess's birthday or the surrender of a rival clan. The rest of the time, warriors relied on perfume sachets stuffed with aromatic herbs like camphor and mugwort, tucked into their kimono sleeves. If you caught a whiff of samurai approaching, you'd know they'd rub their sleeves briskly to release that minty menthol scent. It masked the stench of unwashed armor, rotting fish used as a quick protein snack, and the lingering musk of unmentionable bodily functions after a 9-hour shiver march through snow. Now, imagine being a lowly foot soldier, trudging through 3 feet of snow, your feet encased in wooden clogs with damp rice straw socks seeping blisters in every step. No foot bath for you. Instead, you'd scrape your foot against the rough side of your own lacquered armor between battles, hoping to dislodge the worst of the grime. Then you'd rewrap your strappy sandals and trudge on, leaving a trail of stinky footprints so pungent even wolves hesitated to follow. But let's not forget the glorious Middle Ages of Western Europe, where bathing was sometimes considered sinful. In 13th century Paris, priests warned that water could open the pores to evil spirits, or worse, sinful thoughts. So many townsfolk brushed off pool baths entirely. If you lived in a timber-framed house whose walls wept icy drafts, You might light a small tub of pea soup over the hearth, then hover above it like a medieval steam inhalation, hoping the steam would kill lice and mask your stink with the fragrance of boiled legumes. Fashionable nobles adorn themselves with fragrant gloves perfumed with musk and ambergris, so any unintended groin odors might be forgiven as a bold new scent. Meanwhile, the poor huddled in communal hovels that reeked of wet wool, dung, sweat, and fear. Personal space was a myth. You'd wake up tangled in your neighbor's blankets, which were rarely washed because fresh water cost money and precious firewood was hoarded for cooking the once-a-week gruel. Instead of water, people rubbed themselves with lard, literally animal fat, hoping to slough off dirt. The lard solidified instantly in the cold, turning skin into a flaky, crusty shell. A quick rub with a woolen mitten would knock off the worst bits. Voila, approximately 60% clean, just enough to impress your neighbors and not collapse with hypothermia. Over in the Ottoman Empire, palace eunuchs ran a different kind of water show. They heated massive brass tubs in winter, and the sultan's concubines would wash once a fortnight under the watchful eyes of chaperones. The water was scented with rose water and sandalwood, and heavily taxed for the state, of course. Citizens heard rumors of those legendary baths and imagined golden fountains and dancing nymphs. In reality, the tub drainage would freeze into a dome of ice overnight, leading to a mad scramble at dawn to break the ice before the next batch of laundry. Laundry? Yes. In Istanbul, they'd boil clothes in enormous cauldrons of salted water, change the water once, then drape garments over charred logs. The smoke-infused fabric gained a smoky gray patina. Fancy if you were into that monochrome aesthetic. Now none of this addresses dental hygiene, because let's face it, tooth decay was the least of your worries when your toes were turning black. Across cultures, people would chew on twigs, say willow or oak, to clean their teeth and rub the gums with abrasive powders made from crushed seashells or burnt bone. In freezing weather, those powders turned into something like cement, adhering stubbornly to every crevice of your mouth and making it impossible to speak without whistling like a haunted pipe organ. If you were wealthy, you'd keep a small whale's tooth or ivory rod to scrape plaque, but the cold would shrink your gums away from the tool, drawing blood, and making you wonder if a mouthful of frozen arsenic would feel any better. Then there were hygiene superstitions. In medieval Russia, some peasants believed that washing your face on certain icy nights would anger the water spirits, who'd freeze your cheeks solid, so they'd dab their faces with snow instead, if it was holy snow gathered from churchyards at midnight. The logic? Pure snow from consecrated ground was blessed. Muddy snow scraped off the road belonged to the devil. They'd whisper prayers describing how Jesus wept blood at the sight of unclean nostrils, concluding with, "Bless this holy snow, may my pores hold fast, and may no evil spirits enter through my nostrils." This produced the fortunate side effect of exfoliation, and horrifying red rashes that burned like the fires of hell. Let's look at one more snapshot. The Alaskan Inupiat in the 16th century. They hollowed out ice blocks to create tiny steam chambers, draping caribou hides over the top to trap the steam. Inside, a family huddled around a small fire, clenching chunks of warm blubber as soap, because the fat contained fatty acids that cut grease and killed bacteria. It was effective, yes, but sitting naked in a steaming cocoon of fat and animal fibers left you smelling like a deep fryer at a fish and chip shop. Afterward, you dash across the ice to plunge into an unheated lake, because nothing says clean like a full-body shock. This water was so cold that your lungs seized, and some elders claimed that anyone who hesitated even a moment longer risked their diaphragm freezing solid. Once they peeled you off the ice, you'd be wrapped in sealskin, the scalding steam from your still warm body fogging everyone's eyeglasses, or fisheye goggles if you were that fancy. So, dear viewers, as we huddle under electric blankets and tap warm water from an unending faucet, spare a thought for Olaf, for Emperor Constantine, for those musk-scented gloves, and for every poor soul who ever thought, maybe I'll just skip bathing until spring. They lived, and often tragically froze, under conditions that would make our richest spa retreats look like roadside motels with subpar Yelp ratings. In our next segment, we'll delve into the ingenious, and sometimes downright ridiculous, tools and concoctions people invented to stay clean, and how many of them backfired in spectacularly smelly ways. Until then, keep those toiletries close, and maybe invest in a thermal flask of hot water, just in case. As the frost keeled over your nose hairs and your teeth rattled like a tambourine in a blizzard, you might think, surely by now someone invented a halfway decent sponge. Think again. Welcome to part 2 of our icy odyssey, where desperate inventiveness collides with medieval misery, and every miracle cure for grime ends up a roaring, smelly disaster. It all began with the universally reviled hair shirt. No, not the trendy, eco-friendly scrub. This was an actual garment woven from coarse animal hair, meant to irritate your skin so mercilessly that you'd rather soap yourself with freezing slush than endure its scratchy embrace. Monks in the 11th century France donned these thorns on a shirt contraptions, convinced that spiritual purity was synonymous with permanent itchiness. They'd slip into damp cloaks for warmth, layer on the hair shirt next, then chafe and mutter prayers until vision blurred. Washing? Make it stop. Dry bath? Even worse. Every particle of crushed diatomaceous earth they rubbed on their sunburned faces lodged itself in those tangled hairs, creating a skin-rending torture blender. You can almost hear the monks begging for water just to rinse the itch from their souls. Meanwhile, in the frozen steppes of Mongolia, Genghis Khan's warriors pioneered the bloodbath ritual for cleanliness. No, really. After a day of pillaging and wearing the same felt boots for weeks, they'd slash open a freshly killed yak, plunge in their grimy limbs, and wallow in the steamy, iron-rich gore, believing that animal blood was antibacterial and anointed by Tengri, the eternal sky. A day later, they'd emerge red as lobsters, reeking of adrenaline and mammalian hemoglobin. To the uninitiated, it looked like a cannibalistic rave, yet locals swore by it. No lice, no scabies, and a sheen of oily yak fat that repelled the merciless winter wind. The only downside? Teeth stained pink for days, and children wept at the sight of their fathers returning home, looking like walking steak tartare. Shift continents to late medieval Europe, where plague-ridden townsfolk experimented with the vinegar bath. Legend held that a soak in floral vinegar, not unlike today's artisanal apple cider variety, would kill fleas and neutralize the stench of decay. Problem: vinegar froze solid at 10 degrees, so folks had to add hot embers or horse urine for potency, said the barber surgeon invoices, to keep it liquid. Folks would huddle around massive cauldrons on carts, shoulders hunched, while apprentices ladled lukewarm vinegar over them with leaky pails. By the time you'd finished, your teeth would chatter so hard you'd smash your own face on the tavern table. And thanks to the urine additive, you smelled like a salad gone wrong. Over in the Scottish Highlands, clans invested in the peat scrub. Harvested bog peat leached tannins that killed bacteria, so Highlanders crafted crude soap by boiling peat in seawater with a dash of animal fat. It turned into a gritty, soapy sludge that scratched every layer of your epidermis off like a flaky pancake. After scrubbing, you were encouraged to plunge into lochs, icy enough to freeze your heart faster than a confrontation with a MacDonald chieftain. Those who survived called it the baptism of the brave. But let's be honest, most just avoided the whole affair until a traveling priest threatened excommunication. Now, let's detour to 14th century Venice, where waterborne waste clogged canals and bathing was relegated to back alley washrooms called tavoletta. These wooden platforms rested over cesspits. You'd sit, drip water from a tiny bowl, then rinse with chunks of spiced soap made from whale oil and citrus rind. The scent must have been divine, if you liked Eau de Rotting Octopus, because Venetian nobles prized fragrance above all. They'd pack their chambers with exotic incense, musk from Indian civets, ambergris from sperm whales, and powdered pearls, just to mask the filth. Guests entering a palazzo were greeted by a wall of perfume, so thick it could knock an ox unconscious. Meanwhile, servants mopped the floors with wine, under the pretense that a fine Bordeaux cleans better than water. It didn't. It just made your socks sticky, and you got drunk by accident. Turning eastward to the Ming dynasty in 15th century China, the imperial court devised the jade roller massage for skincare and for hygiene by proxy. Courtiers believed that rolling chill jade across their faces not only reduced puffiness, but also pressed away dirt. In winter, the jade froze solid, so they heated it ever so slightly over incense burners, creating a barely lukewarm rock that slid across cheeks like a bullet train through a snowdrift. It killed no germs, but you looked worryingly glossier. The real boon? Jade rollers doubled as weapons when palace intrigue went cold. A swift roll to the temple ended many a concubine's ambitions. Talk about multitasking. In the New World, the Aztec elite boasted the flower petal rinse. They crushed marigold, rose, and zinnia petals, steeped them in warm water, and used the brew as a facial steamer. Ingenious, until winter chills turned floriography into a frozen tangle of petals that adhered to eyebrows. Nobles would stare at one another, eyebrows frosted and stuck together, feeling both regal and ridiculous. By the time they naively thought, "This actually smells nice," the petals turned black and slimy, reinventing the concept of beauty sleep as a nightmare of crusty eyelashes. Back in medieval England, ironically named tapping stools served to punish supposed witches by dunking them in icy ponds, half as a penance, half as an anti-lice bath. The suspect was tied to the stool, slid off into freezing water, then hauled out as the crowd watched for bubbles, proof of witchiness, or hypothermia, proof of mismanagement. While undeniably cruel, the method had 100% success at cleansing, though with an uncomfortably high mortality rate. Local lords applauded. Thorough and efficient, one record noted, though Lord Percival lost 3 servants to infection afterward. Let's not forget the Ottoman hammams of the 16th century, public bathhouses where heat met humidity, and every quartered citizen spent exactly 30 seconds in the steam room before exiting mid-sneeze, gasping for Arctic air. Winter hammam patrons walked through snow in only as much as a loincloth, led by eunuchs who coaxed them through massage tables lathered in olive oil soap. They emerged red and slippery, to be lathered again by attendants wielding keys mitts, rough gloves that tore at calluses and skin alike. The miracle of the hammam was in the recap. After rigorous scrubbing, you were bludgeoned with scented towels, rolled in rose petals, and given a cup of scalding sherbet. You might leave cleaner than you'd ever been, but you looked like a buttered pastry and smelled like a Turkish delight factory. Before we move on to part 3, where we'll explore the ingenious and utterly misguided hygiene gadgets that history forgot, let's honor the unsung heroes, the medieval sponge stick, the horsehair gloves, and the desperate tavern keeper who tried to sell fresh snow rubs as a new spa treatment. They remind us that, long before hot showers and scented lotions, people would endure almost anything to feel remotely clean, and would invent nearly anything to avoid a proper bath. So next time your water heater hiccups, quit complaining. At least you're not scrubbing with frozen goat dung. Stay tuned, stay slightly less filthy than our ancestors, and remember, survival is nothing without a little absurdity. Part 3 kicks off with humanity's favorite pastime, inventing gadgets that promise miraculous cleanliness and deliver nothing but frostbite and frustration. Strap in as we explore the ridiculous contraptions, cunning homebrews, and entrepreneurial scams that people relied on to scrub, scrape, and deodorize themselves when the temperature hovered somewhere between brisk and permafrost. First, meet the sponge on a stick, your medieval answer to a showerhead. Crafted from porous sea sponge affixed to a carved wooden dowel, it promised to let you cradle scalding water in the palm of your hand without immediately dropping it. In reality, the first prototype snapped in two the moment you applied any leverage. The second prototype soaked up 6 liters of water, then leaked like a sieve. By prototype 7, someone decided it was more valuable burned as kindling than used for hygiene. Surviving examples are now on display in dusty museum basements under failed bathing innovations. Not deterred, enterprising tanners in 12th century Germany pitched the hide brush. Imagine a giant boar's bristle brush mounted on a rotating axle, powered by a team of peasants trudging on a treadmill. The idea: press your grimy skin against the bristles and mechanically exfoliate like a human sausage being stuffed. Demos occurred in village squares where volunteers were strapped into a wooden frame and whirled around the brush head, an effect not unlike medieval whack-a-mole. The audience cheered until the volunteers' arms flew free from their sockets. They rapidly decided to stick with handheld brushes and private screaming. Meanwhile, in Renaissance Florence, cosmetic alchemists whipped up the mercury melange, a paste containing powdered cinnabar, mercury sulfide, ground pearls, and crushed rose petals. Marketed as an all-in-one cleanser and youth elixir, it glimmered like pink toothpaste. Users applied it to their faces, feeling decidedly aristocratic, until jaw pain set in, followed by hallucinations, tremors, and eventual tooth loss. The side effect list was conveniently printed in tiny Gothic script that no one bothered to read. This product cemented the link between beauty and bodily decay for centuries. Across the globe, Ottoman chemists created the jalab jar, a copper vessel filled with mixture of honey, olive oil, and coarsely ground lavender buds. Heated gently over embers, the concoction turned into a sweet-smelling sludge. Bathers dipped linen strips into the mixture, wound the strips around their limbs, and sloughed away dirt as they peeled the cloth ribbon off. Sound soothing? Think medieval waxing with chunks of fabric stuck in your hair and an unshakable aroma of barnyard flower power. Clients either emerged gloriously smooth or hobbling around with half their skin torn off. Meanwhile, the French court under Louis XIII took a more theatrical approach. They employed perfume fountains, fancy fountains in palace courtyards that dispersed scented mists of rosewater and orange blossom. Courtiers flocked to stand beneath jets of floral vapor, convinced they were being cleansed. In reality, the mist barely wetted their elaborate wigs, and the wind blew the spray back into their faces, turning powdered noses into sticky pink glaciers. Any grit or grime persisted, hidden under layers of pomade and hair powder, awaiting the next grand ball to reveal itself in a cloud of dandruff. In Britain, the 1600s saw the birth of the inimitable smell eradicator, a small tin of alum crystals you'd carry in your pocket. The idea: crush a few crystals, rub across your skin, and sweat would mix with the alum to form a protective barrier. It worked, if you believed protective barrier meant acidic rash that burns like dragon spit. Soldiers returning from campaigns in Flanders reported hands so raw they couldn't hold their muskets. Yet merchants sold it as the soldier's choice for freshness, and wives insisted their husbands apply it before every battle. Further north, the Sami people of Lapland had a genuine innovation: the steam sledge. Two massive ice blocks formed a chamber atop a sled. Inside, they lit a peat fire on a raised grate, draped wet hides over the lid, and let steam pour out the sides. Families huddled inside to sweat out grime and lice. Ingenious, but mobility was limited. If the sled tipped or the fire died, you either froze or suffocated. Anecdotes survive of travelers stumbling upon overturned steam sledges, peeking inside to find intact bodies. 1 foot in euphoria, 1 foot in hypothermia. Back in China during the Ming Dynasty, inventors toyed with the bellows bath, a portable wooden box equipped with foot bellows at the base. You'd pump furiously, sending blasts of warm air through holes in the top, then sit atop the box to steam your posterior. Official trials showed it ineffective at cleaning beyond the nether regions and disastrous for circulation. Village elders ended up with varicose veins and hemorrhoids. Use discontinued by imperial decree, though black market knockoffs persisted in tea houses. On the American frontier, settlers cobbled together cistern baths. Rainwater collected in wooden barrels was piped into frameworks for open-air tubs. Since barrels froze, they wrapped ropes of wool around them and lit lanterns overhead to keep water semi-liquid. The result? A dimly lit tub of murky water punctuated by floating bits of bark and moth wings. Some inventive farmers dipped woolen blankets in the tub as a blanket bath, then slapped themselves dry. It took more energy than hauling personal buckets from the stream, one of history's great anti-innovations. Enter the 18th century and the dawn of mechanical hygiene. Swiss watchmakers in Geneva produced the self-rotating toothbrush, a hand crank that spun boar bristle heads at breakneck speed. Promoted as a marvel of engineering, it delivered plaque removal in seconds, along with deep gouges in your gums and bleeding so fierce you'd need to swab with brandy to stop it. Nonetheless, some wealthy eccentrics boasted of using it daily, confidently flashing gums more crimson than their velvet waistcoats. In India, Ayurvedic practitioners championed herbal sit bathing for winter wellness. You'd steep mung beans, neem leaves, and chunks of frankincense resin in boiling water, then sit in the mixture until your rear end resembled a saffron-stained marshmallow. Supposed benefits included repelling hemorrhoids and calming winter chills. Reviews were mixed. Supporters swore by it. Opponents swore while trying to stand up. Across North Africa, Berber women fashioned clay scrub stones. Hardened clay balls rolled across oiled skin to remove dead cells. Feedback, effective, but the friction generated heat so intense that skin blistered. They quickly learned to douse the stones in olive oil before use, turning it into an early oil-based peel. Villagers either emerged supple or sporting second-degree burns in intricate patterns. Even apothecaries got in on the hustle. In 17th century England, pharmacists sold galena powder, ground lead mixed with chalk and herbs. Advertised as an unguent for skin brightening, it actually accelerated lead poisoning, causing hair loss and facial palsy. Sellers argued, "You won't care about wrinkles when you feel euphoric," which was technically true, if your definition of euphoric included collapse and coma. But the crowning glory of hygienic tech arrived in 19th century Prussia, the heat-driven deodorizing chair. Picture a cast-iron throne with heating coils under the seat and a series of vents along the backrest. Sit, and your body heat-activated odor-neutralizing charcoal filters. Users reported mild warmth, a faint whiff of peat, and total failure at masking real stench. Prussian soldiers nicknamed it the Iron Tyrant, claiming it tortured them worse than enemy bayonets. Production ceased when a prototype overheated and caused a house fire. Our ancestors' hunger for cleanliness drove them to absurd lengths, resulting in charred skin, psychotic side effects, and more than a few funerals. Still, though many contraptions crashed and burned, sometimes literally, the ingenuity on display reminds us that the drive to wash isn't merely modern vanity, but a primal urge. In Part 4, we'll peek into the future, as imagined by writers in the 18th and 19th centuries, who foresaw robots scrubbing your back in glass-enclosed steam chambers. Did any of their wild predictions come true? Join us next time to find out, and prepare to be both amazed and horrified by humanity's unending quest to stop smelling like a barn. Part 4 plunges headlong into the realm of visionary toilette, the wildly optimistic and spectacularly misguided predictions of future hygiene from 17th through 19th century dreamers. Strap on your steampunk goggles, ice your toes for courage, and prepare to witness contraptions that never quite made it past the sketchbook, or that made it and promptly exploded. The Enlightenment's Earl of Sudsington, circa 1723, penned the first treatise on mechanical ablution, envisioning a room-sized apparatus of polished brass gears, leather bellows, and glass tubing. His magnum opus, the Ablutomatic. Users would recline in a carved walnut armchair, resembling a guillotine stand, press a button, and be pelted by 40 alternating nozzles of steam, scented water, and pulverized mint leaves. The Earl proudly claimed this would render bathing a leisure of art, not a toil of survival. Early prototypes, however, exploded under the weight of built-up pressure, showering test subjects with scalding mint paste and shattered glass. The device was quietly mothballed, and decades later, its remaining parts were repurposed into an elaborate cuckoo clock that nobody dared wind. Across the channel, the French inventor Madame Fleur d'Eau, 1765, authored a pamphlet titled Utopia Propria, on the future of clean skin and happy citizens. She imagined a network of hygiene stations along Parisian boulevards, miniature glass kiosks where steam jets, tickling feathers, and calibrated perfumes would complete your daily ablution in under 2 minutes. Citizens would simply step inside, pay a sou, and emerge fresh as morning dew. She speculated that within 50 years, a benevolent government might subsidize these booths, reducing disease and improving morale. In reality, mold-filled public toilets fit her vision more closely than cleansing booths, damp, rank, and avoided at all costs. Her pamphlet circulated among aristocrats until the Revolution, after which it vanished, except for one surviving copy discovered in 1952 beneath a staircase in Versailles, stuck to a rat skeleton. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Benjamin Ben Grimebuster, an eccentric American tinkerer in 1784 Philadelphia, predicted shower railways gliding overhead in public bathhouses. Rails of gleaming copper would carry suspended shower carriages, tiny gondolas releasing timed spurts of water as you pedaled a stationary bicycle to fuel the pump. Grimebuster believed that communal exercise plus hygiene would breed civic vitality. He raised funds, built a prototype in his workshop, and invited townsfolk for a grand unveiling. The machine worked splendidly until the bicycle chain snapped, sending the carriage careening into a wall, and drenching spectators with a mix of water and rancid lard, left over from his soap experiments. Attendance never recovered, and Grimebuster closed shop, later joining a mysterious society of pipe dream inventors in the Catskills. In 1831, a brilliant, if somewhat unhinged German engineer named Klaus von Quackenhausen sketched the hydro-optic bath, featuring tinted glass walls and lenses that magnified ephemeral water droplets, creating the illusion of dancing prisms on your skin. Users would recline on a velvet chaise, dangle limbs through glass slits, and bask in tinted sprays of perfumed water. Von Quackenhausen believed that color wavelengths could sterilize bacteria, an early theory of chromotherapy. Unfortunately, the tinted glass acted like greenhouse panes. The capsule overheated, boiled the water reservoir, and cooked unfortunate volunteers like lobsters. The inventor vanished under suspicion of foul play and was never heard from again. Back in England, by mid-century, a cadre of proto-scientists affectionately dubbed the bathologists published journals on pneumatic washing. Their pièce de résistance, a negative pressure shower that would suck grime and odor out of your pores by creating gentle suction across your skin surface. The pathologists claimed it was the next evolutionary step beyond soap. They built a machine at King's College London, but test subjects emerged bruised and blue-lipped, resembling blood-sucking leeches more than clean citizens. The Pathology Society folded amid scandal, and its publications are now collector's items for fans of medical curiosities. In Russia, amid the industrial fervor of the 1860s, engineers in St. Petersburg unveiled a prototype, steam-propelled Hygiene train. A fleet of rail cars converted into mobile bathhouses would traverse the frozen tundra, delivering hot baths to remote outposts and logging camps. Each car housed a steam boiler burning coal and pine stumps, water tanks stored at ambient temperature until warmed. The concept appealed to czarist officials keen to bolster frontier morale. But test runs plunged the cars into snowdrifts, severed telegraph lines, and occasionally self-destructed when boilers overheated. After the Russo-Turkish War drained treasury funds, the project was canned. Local lore still speaks of phantom whistleblows echoing across the Siberian plains, though most historians attribute them to coal gas leaks in abandoned train tunnels. The Victorians, never shy of novelty, attempted electric bathing by the late 19th century. Pioneers theorized that mild electric currents could kill microbes and invigorate muscle. They built metal tubs with insulated electrodes and battery packs, proudly demonstrating mild shocks that tingled your toes. In theory, you'd climb into the tub, flip a switch, and enjoy a sanitary buzz. In practice, wires corroded in water, leading to full-body jolts that knocked bathers unconscious. Some never recovered. The experiments ended abruptly after a tragic incident in which an earl's favorite poodle was electrocuted mid-dip. "Let the beast rest in peace," the earl declared, "and let my bathwater be left alone." Across continents, the industrial age also spawned soap pulverization towers. In bustling cities like Manchester and New York, massive chimneys expelled fine mist of liquefied soap over public squares at predetermined intervals. Citizens walking beneath these towers hoped to catch enough particles to stay reasonably clean. Aromatic dimethyl sulfate, no, this wasn't grass approved, was added to improve the scent. Panic ensued when people reported burning eyes, slippery cobblestones led to broken limbs, and livestock refused to graze in foam-laden pastures. Municipalities dismantled the towers one by one, muttering curses on the day someone decided to weaponize cleanliness. By the turn of the century, futurists and pulp magazine writers conjured even more outlandish schemes. Telepathic showers that sensed your need for suds and triggered microdroplets via radio waves. Autonomous hygiene automata with porcelain heads, wired joints, and scrubbing mitts for arms. And aerated soap clouds pumped into living rooms for ambient disinfection. None of these ever moved beyond speculative fiction, but their blueprints littered patent offices, waiting for someone to realize steam-powered toilets and electricity weren't enough. These flights of fancy contrast starkly with our modern hot water ubiquity. Today we turn a knob and enjoy endless thermal streams, yet we grumble when the Wi-Fi is down. Our ancestors risked frostbite, mercury poisoning, electrocution, and collective asphyxiation for a shot at cleanliness. They swapped dignity for innovation, only to discover that the simplest shower often beats the grandest device. To conclude, because every video needs a closure that pleases algorithms and human attention spans alike, let us reflect on the absurd lengths to which people have gone in pursuit of hygiene. From the ablutomatic scalding mint paste carnage to the electric bath's deadly jolt, Each doomed contraption reminds us that necessity is the mother of invention, but desperation is its mischievous twin. And here's your retention booster. Imagine a world where a single lamppost sprays scented steam on passersby, or where your morning routine involves plugging your behind into a battery pack. If that doesn't make you hug your shower head with gratitude, nothing will. So next time you stand under a reliable, non-exploding nozzle, appreciate the miracle of precise plumbing, rubber seals, and safety valves, and whisper a silent thank you to every forgotten inventor who braved frost, fumes, and flames in hopes of a cleaner tomorrow. That's it, survivors, the grand finale of our 4-part expedition through freezing months and filthy contraptions. Be sure to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell, so you never miss more darkly humorous dives into historical nightmares. Drop a comment telling me which hygiene gadget you'd least want to try. May I suggest the electric bath? And share where you're watching from. Until next time, stay warm, stay clean, and remember, in history's icy grip, even a puddle counts as paradise. You wake up to your own breath freezing in midair, your toes so numb you can't tell if you're alive, or just a block of ice lying in a puddle. Sound fun? Of course not, but welcome to winter in a medieval town, where central heating meant rubbing 2 sticks together and hoping for the best. Before you start shivering uncontrollably, grab a blanket and maybe a hot drink, but resist the urge to complain, because our ancestors had it worse. Now dim the lights, fire up that imaginary hearth, or a real one if you're lucky, and let's plunge headfirst into part 1 of our 4-part saga, how medieval towns survived bone-chilling winters without so much as a thermostat. The clattering curtains of cold medieval houses were glorified iceboxes, thick stone or timber walls that absorbed daylight like a hangover and radiated every last bit of warmth back out when night fell. Windows? Priceless slits covered with oiled parchment that fogged up faster than your ex's excuses. People literally taped animal bladders over frames to keep drafts out. An elegant solution if you enjoy decorating your home with semi-transparent pig innards. Curtains were woven from sheep's wool or goat hair, but unless you owned a small fortune in livestock, they were thin, moth-ridden, and as effective at retaining heat as a wet paper bag. Insulation innovation, sort of. Enter the medieval homeowner's proudest invention, the straw mattress bolted to the walls. They'd plaster walls with straw or rushes, hoping to create a barrier. Think of it as wallpaper, if wallpaper smelled like a barn and attracted rodents. Floors were earthen until you could scrape together enough coins for wooden planks. Otherwise, your feet touched frozen dirt, transferring chills straight to your spine. Those who dared attempt tapestries discovered that heavy wool hangings helped. A little. You had to hang them so close to the wall, you couldn't walk between them and the plaster, or else the tapestry would freeze stiff and crack under pressure. The communal hearth individual fireplaces were rare and outrageously expensive. Instead, towns set up a massive communal hearth in the Great Hall or Central Meeting House. Picture the local equivalent of a college dorm lounge, but with more soot, more coughing, and a tendency to collapse under the weight of half-burnt logs. Every household sent a representative with firewood contributions, a load of oak here, a bundle of sticks there. If you forgot your duty, town council fined you a chicken, or in extreme cases, burned your straw insulation. Once lit, the hearth roared like a dragon and radiated heat to everyone within a 10-foot radius. Beyond that, frostbite set in. Folks clustered around, trading gossip, complaining about frozen gravy, and passing around a communal ladle for lukewarm gruel. Layered fashion. Surviving the cold was a game of onion layering. Townsfolk donned multiple tunics, woolen hose, leather boots stuffed with straw, fur-lined cloaks, and knitted caps that covered everything but the eyes, because frostbite on your eyelids sounded fatal. Underneath, a linen shirt protected skin from wool's itch attack. Overall, that when a wool felt hat topped with animal pelts if you were wealthy, or a hay flagon cap if you were, well, not. Gloves were impractical for manual labor, so blacksmiths and bakers often worked with numb fingers, missing strikes or igniting themselves on hot iron. Children roamed the streets looking like tiny marshmallow armies, scarves trailing spit frozen icicles off their noses. Food as fuel. Medieval cooks knew that calories equaled heat. Bread early and often, they said, preferably rye or barley, because wheat was hoarded for weddings and royal courts. Soups thickened with oats, pea porridge, and smoked meats simmered endlessly over low flames in cast iron cauldrons. But in deepest winter, firewood ran scarce. Enter peat, compressed marsh plant matter that burned slower than logs and smoldered for hours, releasing a dank aroma that earned peat-burning towns the nickname Eau de Bog. Kitchens doubled as warming stations. Families huddled near stoves, baking enough flatbreads to survive until spring. The downside, you smelled of burnt marsh, and when you finally found clean water to bathe, the peat residue left your skin gritty and gray. Snowed-in infrastructure, streets transformed into tunnels of slush and snow by December. Inns and shops boarded doors and windows, businesses shut down. Mail carried by wind-ridden messengers turned into surprise gifts of icicles at your doorstep. Instead of cobblestones, towns looked like labyrinths of waist-high banks with narrow, treacherous passageways carved by the bravest souls, or by dogs that knew the quickest route to taverns. Wheelbarrows and carts sank into drifts. Livestock stalled in frozen pens. Many towns constructed roofed snow galleries, covered walkways supported by wood beams that connected key areas like the church, marketplace, and communal oven. They resembled medieval sky bridges, minus the safety rails and the functioning heating lamps. Health hazards and hypothermia. Hypothermia was no joke. Chronic exposure turned digits black and numb, leading to frostfang amputations justified by creaking joints and tissue gangrene. Town healers, often unlicensed to name Bertha or Grendel, mixed concoctions of warmed animal fat and herbs. You'd lie bound on a stretcher with hot bricks pressed to your torso, beneath blankets that trapped heat, but also fleas. The sick were quarantined in lean-tos outside the town walls, left to perish quietly, unless the town council decided a funeral pyre would conserve firewood. Contagion, be it flu or winter fever, spread faster than gossip in the market square, decimating families already starving. Winterlight and candle economy. Without electric lights, days ended at dusk. Torches and rushlights, twisted reeds soaked in animal fat, winked out within minutes, leaving people in darkness. Beeswax candles were a luxury. Poorer households made candles from tallow, smelly, smoky, and prone to dripping grease onto your only pair of trousers. To conserve tallow, families recycled candle stumps for weeks, scraping hardened drips into clay molds. The effect? Dancing shadows on walls that looked like ghostly apparitions, fueling rumors of hauntings and demonic possession. Townspeople slept in shifts, waking occasionally to stir the fire and feed rushlights, but never long enough to dream. Preparations in autumn. Surviving winter began months earlier. Autumn festivals included communal woodcutting parties. Think Viking lumberjack parties without the Instagram. Men and boys chopped trees, women and girls bundled kindling and thatch. Children hauled bundles to storage sheds. Town leaders marked quotas. Each household owed a stack of wood proportional to its size. Miss your quota, and your home's straw insulation got downgraded to, you guessed it, mud, chinking alone. Grain stores were filled. Salted meats and dried fish were laid down. Spices like pepper and cinnamon became currency, both for flavor and as a morale-boosting reminder of warmer lands. Snow festivals and merry madness. Oddly, towns found ways to celebrate. Frost fairs, if your town had a frozen river, offered makeshift markets on ice, with steaming stalls selling mulled ale and roasted chestnuts. You'd slide around on skates carved from bone, share snow-packed meat pies, and gamble with dice carved from reindeer antler. If the ice held, you watched acrobats and jugglers. If it cracked, you might drown. The risk? A shortcut to hypothermia fame. But frost fairs also meant community spirit. Everyone huddled together against the freeze, shouting to be heard over the wind's howl, sharing body heat like medieval space heaters. The role of religion. Churches doubled as warming centers. Monks kept fires burning in cloistered hearths. Parishioners joined early morning vigils to pray for sunlight. Cross-shaped stone seats lined the nave. Chilly benches warmed quickly by huddled congregants. Preachers framed the cold as divine penance. Suffering in sub-zero was good for the soul. Towns held candlelit processions through drifts, carrying statues of patron saints to bless the fields for next year's harvest. The idea, spiritual heat would somehow translate to physical warmth. It didn't, but nobody complained. Liturgy kept time, warmed voices, and at least you weren't alone in the freeze. In part 2, we'll explore how specific towns, York, Novgorod, Ghent, and Lubeck, each developed signature winter survival tactics, from subterranean ovens to communal bathhouses under the snow. We'll reveal the ingenious and often bat-crap crazy schemes that helped entire populations hunker down through months of ice and darkness. Until then, clutch your mug of mead, tuck your hands under your cloak, and thank your plumbing gods that your biggest winter worry is adjusting the thermostat. In part 1, we met the bitter bite of winter in a generic medieval town. Now we're zooming in on 4 real places where ingenuity met desperation amid ice and gloom. Buckle your fur-lined hats as we tour York, Novgorod, Ghent, and Lubeck, and discover how each turned frost into opportunity, or at least into a slightly less miserable existence. York, subterranean sanctuaries and flue-cooked bread. York's medieval citizens didn't wait for spring, they retreated underground. Beneath narrow, cobbled lanes lay a network of sandstone caves, natural cellars repurposed into frost-free shelters. Wealthy merchants carved alcoves to store perishable goods. Commoners jammed together in low-ceilinged chambers, where 20 bodies generated enough collective heat to keep frost at bay. The air was rancid, equal parts damp wool, spilled ale, and unwashed humanity. But at least you didn't wake up with your hair frozen to the ceiling. Above ground, York's castle keep acted as a heater core for the entire city. The garrison's kitchens burned endless fires, and the smoke, which would normally make a town stink like a bacon factory, was channeled through hollow walls of adjacent homes. Builders drilled rudimentary flues into timber frames so that every hearth ember tucked warmth into living rooms. Town council records show repeated complaints of smoke infiltration, blackened plaster, and eye irritation, but also a grudging admission: better soot than shivers. York's bakers perfected flue-baked bread. They stoked roaring ovens in the city. Walls' inner passages then slid loaves along iron rails to secondary chambers buried beneath homes. Those chambers absorbed heat for hours, turning houses into passive radiators. By midday, families would inhale enough residual warmth to loosen frozen joints and thaw morning porridge. Downside? Every basement meal tasted faintly of charred barley and peat smoke, so breakfast in York resembled eating a campfire. Novgorod, Russian stoves, and birch bark burritos. Over in the frozen vastness of Novgorod, wooden izbas, log huts, were snug and surprisingly airtight, until you opened the door and unleashed a wind tunnel that threatened to whip your scalp clean off. Their secret weapon was the Russian pechka, a massive masonry stove dominating one corner of the room. Heated by burning birch logs for 6 hours straight, its iron top and ceramic flue retained heat for days. Novgorodians would cook, bake, dry laundry, and even sleep on top of the stove, trading dreams of summer for the risk of third-degree burns. Families took birch bark burritos to heart. Peel layers of birch bark, naturally antiseptic, and wrap your potatoes and salted fish in bundles. Tuck them into the stove's embers, then withdraw perfectly steamed dinners, along with a comforting wisp of smoky resin aroma. The bark charred away, the embers sterilized the fish, and hungry peasants emerged soot-smudged but surprisingly content. Unlike most medieval towns, Novgorod's artisans built double walls, an outer shell of unpeeled logs and an inner lining of hewn timber, with a hollow gap stuffed with moss, straw, or more birch bark. This primitive insulation, combined with the stove's radiance, kept indoor temperatures between 5 DGC and 10 DGC, even when the outside mercilessly plunged below 30 DGC. Hunters returning with sled dogs often found their homes noticeably warmer than their kennels, leading to minor conflicts over sleeping arrangements. Dogs, as it turned out, were less willing to pay firewood taxes. Ghent, canal fog, greenhouse guilds, and the ice smelter Ghent, Belgium, had it both worse and better, trapped between freezing canals and wealthy weaving guilds that needed humidity control. Ghent's intricate network of waterways froze into a labyrinth of cracking ice, shutting down barge traffic and rendering watermills useless for months. To compensate, the city council mandated that every guild build its own greenhouse, adjacent to its workshop. These weren't botanical conservatories, but simple glass-framed chambers, warmed by coals and waste heat from looms. Wool and flax needed damp, not freezing, air to prevent fibers from snapping. Guild halls piped steam from adjacent bakeries or brew houses directly into workspaces via ceramic pipes, essentially medieval radiators. Weavers reported that their thumbs stayed limber. Apprentices claimed they never had to juggle ice-cold shuttles. Critics noted the air felt like a sauna, but shivering fingers made even swampy humidity feel like a blessing. When canals iced over, Ghent's merchants tried ingenious and insane solutions to melt the ice. The city treasury purchased vast quantities of burning coal, which they shoveled onto wooden barges parked midstream. The coal heaps smoldered, releasing heat under ice shelves. In theory, warmer water rose and dissolved surrounding ice. In practice, barges sank underweight, and crews resorted to hacking away at ice with iron bars. When coal ran out, they resorted to straw burns on floating rafts, setting nearby key warehouses ablaze. Eventually, Ghent decreed, "Let the ice be." Citizens trudged across frozen canals, risking broken limbs, but at least they stayed warm from adrenaline. Lübeck, brick bastion, salt stoves, and fish smoke saunas. Last stop, Lübeck, proud leader of the Hanseatic League, and owner of some of the blockiest, coldest walls north of the Alps. Lübeck's signature move was the brick-built cold chamber. Essentially, each merchant's house boasted an inner courtyard sealed by high brick walls. During winter, they'd build a central fire pit directly in the courtyard's center, as high as a man's chest, feeding it with pine logs and leftover shipping crates. The brick walls absorbed and radiated the heat inward, turning the courtyard into a chicken coop sauna. Keepers would bring in coops of livestock at night, both for warmth and smoked eggs. Inside, fishmonger stalls adjoining residential wings doubled as summer kitchens. In winter, they transformed into smokehouses. Stacks of salted cod, imported from Norway, hung over smoldering piles of oak chips. The rising smoke filled marketplaces with so much pungent warmth that people said, "Instead of goose-down quilts, we'd wrap ourselves in cod." Those who dared lean in for a sniff found their lungs coated in fishy soot, but fingers marinated in the residual oil stayed unfrozen far longer than bare flesh. But Lübeck's piece de resistance was the salt stove. Salt warehouses were abundant, salt being the currency of cured herring. Merchants discovered that coal smoldering beneath salt piles created a surprisingly intense, even heat. You'd dig a pit inside the warehouse floor, line it with iron plates, and bury embers under 2 feet of salt. The salt acted like a giant thermal battery, retaining and distributing warmth. Shoreside families famously opened their doors at 2 a.m., inviting itinerant sailors, frozen from long Baltic voyages, to huddle around the salt stoves until dawn. By sunrise, they looked less like drowned rats and more like human-shaped salt licks. Crosstown, contrasts and shared struggles. Despite local quirks, these towns shared the same theme song: heat is life, wood is gold. If you run out of either, see you next spring. They depended on communal labor, whether hauling logs up medieval ramps, layering moss between logs, or stoking coal in canal barges. Even rival guilds, nobles, and clergy endured the same bone-numbing chill outside cathedral walls. Transportation networks froze too, cutting off staple imports. York ran low on exotic spices. Novgorod starved for grain. Ghent's wool exports stalled. Lübeck's Baltic trade came to a grinding halt. Cities hoarded salt, oats, and barley as jealous guardians, sparking black market fire sales at dawn, where desperate families traded pewter spoons for a handful of oats. It was a time when the spice rack sat empty, and peppercorns equaled ransom money, literally held for ransom by highwaymen who ambushed wagon trains on snow-packed passes. Every town's public health system boiled down to 2 options: grin and bear it, or drop dead in your threshold. Municipal charters often included cold clauses, stipulating that any uncollected dead, due to frost delaying burial, could be left in doorways until thaw. Religious orders braved the elements to collect them for mass burials outside town walls, wrapping bodies in hemp shrouds, hoping the ground thawed before spring rains washed unmarked bones into rivers, surprising silver linings. Even amid adversity, medieval winters offered unexpected perks. Frozen rivers meant you could build temporary ice roads straight from forest fells to city gates, shortcutting days of sled travel into hours of ice skating glory. Novgorod's fur traders glided on long-width bone skates, transforming supply runs into impromptu races. Ghent's weaving overseers held winter ice regattas, where barges fitted with runners slid along canals in dramatic contests. Spectators warmed themselves by tossing wood into flue pits above spectators' stands. Festivals took on new coatings of absurdity. York's Candlemas revels featured torchlit jousts on frozen moats. Horsemen risked sliding lances into each other, and occasionally into frozen carcasses beneath the ice. Lubeck's Sailor's Yule had fishermen climbing salt crate towers to hoist evergreen boughs, festooned with bits of herring for lucky cats and rats. The rats earned winter rations by climbing the boughs and devouring the decorations, but town council minutes simply noted, rats performed admirably, and moved on. Lessons from the medieval chill. So what can modern couch potatoes learn from these frostbitten forebears? 3 things. Prepare early, insulate extravagantly, and never underestimate the power of communal warmth, whether that's a stone stove, a salt pit, or 20 human bodies in a sandstone grotto. Remember, they had no insulation foam, no thermal underwear, and certainly no U-shaped battery-powered slippers. Yet year after year, they survived, and even found ways to laugh at the dripping icicles on their nostrils. Part 3 will sail us into the realm of portable heat, dragon fire drinking horns, coal-smoked hand warmers, and backpackable braziers. We'll meet the merchants who sold winter-in-a-box kits, and the charlatans hawking everlasting coals that fizzled out within minutes. But that's a tale for the next frosty evening, because if there's one thing history teaches us, it's that no matter how ingenious, every heating innovation eventually smells like burnt wood and dashed hopes. Until part 3, stay warm and give thanks that your biggest winter worry is balancing your electric bill. When winter's grip tightened and hearth fires dwindled, medieval ingenuity turned toward portability, because sometimes you needed warmth on the go, and a fixed hearth just wouldn't cut it when you were trudging through 2 feet of snow. Welcome to the era of dragon fire drinking horns, backpackable braziers, and everlasting coal TM. A time when heat itself was a commodity to be bought, sold, and often miserably overpromised. Strap on your fur-trimmed pack, and let's explore the portable heating marvels and catastrophes that kept wandering merchants, pilgrims, and unlucky peasants from freezing solid. Dragonfire Drinking Horns legend tells of a Viking blacksmith named Sven Icebeard who crafted dragonfire horns around 1050 CE. These massive buffalo horn vessels contained a hollow core filled with smoldering peat briquettes bound in woven reeds. A metal mouthpiece allowed you to inhale the hot air, essentially a medieval vape pen for warmth. The concept was simple. Inhale a lungful of toasty peat smoke, exhale sweet relief into numb nostrils and fingertips. Written sagas claim you could stave off frostbite for minutes at a time, depending on how long you held your breath. The reality? Briquettes often burned too hot, scalp searing soot through your woolen hood, and the reed bindings ignited unpredictably, turning a warming breath into a flaming helmet. Sven's smithy went up in flames, twice, and his dragonfire horns vanished into legend, along with his eyebrows. Coal-smoked hand warmers. In 12th century Germany, traveling merchants peddled coal-smoked hand warmers carved from hollowed-out beechwood. Inside, a small smoldering coal sat on a bed of sand. A perforated iron lid diffused the heat. Town criers hawked them as pocket furnaces, ideal for market customers idling in open squares. For a groat, you'd receive a hand-sized bundle wrapped in linen, meant to slip into your gloves. Good in theory, coal on sand equals a slow burn, but poor ventilation frequently led to asphyxiation if you unwrapped it inside a tent. Worse, once the coal died, merchants swapped in cold ash, leaving buyers clutching useless sunken lumps. Records from a Leipzig guild mention a lawsuit when an overeager apprentice stuffed a hand warmer too close to a leather satchel, causing spontaneous combustion, and a lawsuit ending in the merchant forfeits all hand warmers for false advertisement and third-degree burns. Backpackable braziers. Seeking more reliable heat, some enterprising souls invented the backpackable brazier in southern France around 1300 CE. Picture a round iron basin strapped to a wooden frame and slung over the shoulders, filled with charcoal or vinewood embers. The idea was to carry a mini-hearth wherever you roamed. Pilgrims to Santiago de Compostela supposedly relied on braziers to ward off chill on mountain passes. Chronicles recount one such brazier built so heavy that its owner collapsed under its weight 3 miles from the nearest inn, only to be rescued by compassionate shepherds who kicked the brazier into a ravine and carried him home. Misfires occurred when embers spilled through the loose rivets, setting cloaks ablaze. Some travelers resorted to padding the interiors with clay and moss, but that only forced smoke through the shoulder straps, turning monks' habits into tear gas canisters. By the late 14th century, authorities banned braziers on public roads, citing excessive roadblock hazards and unholy pyrotechnics. Winter in a box. Kits. In bustling medieval fairs from Toulouse to Tallinn, you could buy a winter in a box kit, all-in-one bundle promising 4 hours of portable warmth. Packages included a handful of charcoal briquettes, wax-soaked burlap hand and foot wraps, a small flask of spiced rum to fuel the fire in the soul, and a tiny ceramic heat pill, a compressed disc of clay and powdered sulfur that, when ignited, generated intense but short-lived heat. Vendors swore you could survive a night on frozen heath without misery. Travelers' accounts claim most kits either produced enough sulfur vapors to induce nausea, or fizzled out before you crossed the next hillock. One disgruntled knight filed a complaint. The heat pill exploded in my boot, shattering bones and leaving my foot soiled with brimstone for days. Winter-in-a-box kits faded from market stalls as quickly as they'd appeared, though archaeologists still unearthed charred burlap and sulfur stains at former fairgrounds. Charms, potions, and everlasting coal, TM. Of course, where there's desperation, there are charlatans. Medieval apothecaries and traveling fire shamans hawked enchanted heat charms, amulets of iron and copper infused with runic etchings. You'd wear them around your neck, and supposedly their metal would absorb body heat and radiate it back when nights turned frigid. In reality, the amulets weighed a pound apiece and cooled down faster than your common sense. Then there was everlasting coal, TM, trademarked by an English alchemist named Archibald Emberstone in 1392. He claimed to have discovered a miraculous coal that never burned out. Customers paid 20 shillings a lump, affordable only by gentry, but the everlasting coal TM turned out to be nothing more than regular anthracite painted black. Buyers learned their lesson when their money went up in smoke, literally during Archibald's trial for fraud, where he tried to demonstrate the coal's eternal glow by hiding a lit ember under his robe and promptly setting fire to the town records. Portable heat from animals. One of the most inventive strategies involved live creatures. In parts of the Alps, shepherds carried warmth kittens, stray cats acclimated to freezing temperatures and trained to curl in a specially sewn pouch against your chest. The cat's body heat warmed your torso, and their purring was touted as therapeutic ambient vibration. That is, until the cats clawed their way out at 2 a.m., leaving the shepherd's chest one mass of blood and pricked ribs. A few attempts swapped cats for baby goats, reasoning that goats generated more heat. The goat warmers ended disastrously. Goats chewed straw bedding, toppled off shoulders, and demanded to be milked every 3 hours. Within a decade, this method was officially discouraged by mountain councils for excessive livestock cruelty and human goat hygiene concerns. Hand-heated iron balls and warming bricks. Perhaps the most enduring portable heat source was simple: heated iron balls and fire-harvested bricks. Blacksmiths in medieval Poland forged smooth iron spheres that you'd heat in a forge and stash in cloth sacks. The spheres radiated warmth for hours, provided you wrapped them in ample cloth, or else they seared through layers and set tunics ablaze. Warming, or hauchery, bricks followed in England and France. Hollow clay bricks filled with hot embers at communal bakehouses and delivered to homes still freezing. The local baker's children earned pocket money by lugging buckets of red-hot bricks through the snow, shouting, "Ho, hot bricks!" Lenient lords provided bricks to serfs in winter as a form of primitive welfare. Dissenters who stole or shattered bricks faced fines or corporal punishment. That said, people treasured their warming bricks, insulating them in straw bales and trading them like precious metals. Portable spiced wine flasks. For a dual-purpose warmth solution, medieval travelers carried flasks of spiced wine, mulled with cinnamon, cloves, and a hefty slug of brandy. Sipped slowly, the alcohol dilated blood vessels, creating a flush that full-heated the skin. Chroniclers praised English crusaders who embraced merry mead to survive Anatolian frosts. The downside, of course, was that frequent trips to frozen latrines under the stars left many a soldier to his own grief. In extreme cases, travelers conflated the warmth from mulled wine with their actual core temperature, leading to fatal hypothermia when they mistook numbness for merriment. Unfortunately, spiced wine remained a staple of portable warmth, until stricter church councils banned the sinful habit of imbibing on pilgrimages. Community-run itinerant stoves. When individual solutions failed, communities banded together. In 14th century northern Italy, wandering stove artisans called fornacchis pulled massive wheeled stoves through town squares. Villagers queued, paid a small fee, and warmed themselves around the iron drum as the fornacchis pumped bellows and replenished coals. The stoves sported wooden benches, decorative iron filigree, and bell-shaped hoppers to refill coals without dousing the fire. Records from Florence reveal that queue length stretched for blocks, with impatient townsfolk trading swaddled infants to reserve spots in line. Occasionally the bellows would fail, or coals would spill into the snow, leading to near riots. Nevertheless, the itinerant stove became a beloved winter fixture, a reminder that sometimes the best heat is shared heat. Myths and misfires. Not all portable heating tactics were quite so tangible. Folklore abounded with advice. Place a live coal inside a hollowed turnip, plug it with clay and carry it like a talisman. Hang sprigs of rosemary under your cap to ward off cold. Rub your limbs with bear grease before a journey, hoping the fat's density would insulate you. Many tried these until frostbite nipped their ears and stiffened their limbs. One radical pamphlet from 1487 declared that wearing wet wool next to the skin created a steam chamber effect, but test subjects collapsed in minutes from steam burns and pneumonia. Another widely circulated manuscript recommended sleeping with a piece of hot sulfur under your pillow, reportedly producing dreams of melting glaciers, but also auditory hallucinations and chronic headaches. Lessons from the road. From dragonfire horns to heated bricks, portable heating in the Middle Ages was a patchwork of brilliance and blunder. The key takeaways? Heat was a precious resource, worth forging, smuggling, or even stealing. Merchants exploited travelers' desperation until local authorities intervened. Survival often meant trial and error, sometimes deadly error. It meant sharing warmth, whether via communal stoves or huddling in sandstone cellars. Above all, it meant laughter, because if you couldn't laugh at the absurdity of carrying a flaming horn on your back, you'd freeze in despair. In Part 4, we'll return to fixed home innovations, underfloor heating systems beneath abbeys, chimney flue networks hidden in castle walls, and experimental glazed window prototypes that predated modern glass panes. We'll explore how engineers, monks, and royal architects collaborated on heating the unheatable, pushing the boundaries of medieval science. Until then, clutch your warming brick, tuck your embers close, and rest easy, knowing you don't have to worry about your drinking horn igniting your hood. Stay toasty, stay absurd, and remember, in the frozen Middle Ages, creative heat was its own kind of magic. Medieval engineers and architects, faced with a world where a winter lasted 9 months out of 12, refused to accept that a pile of soggy straw was the apex of human thermal comfort. Their solutions ranged from ingenious to absurdly elaborate, blazing underfloor hypoheating, hidden chimney labyrinths, and proto-double glazing that threatened both necks and reputations. Welcome to the realm of fixed home innovations, the final frontier in heating a world that insisted on remaining cold. Monastic hippocausts, abbeys as steam-powered saunas. In the damp stone cloisters of medieval abbeys, monks turned prayerful meditation into an excuse for experimental engineering. Drawing inspiration from Roman hippocausts, underfloor heating systems abandoned during the Dark Ages, medieval monks excavated shallow trenches beneath refectories and infirmaries, laying thick slabs of sandstone as flooring. Beneath these slabs, they built a network of narrow flues fed by the refectory hearth. When the communal fire roared, hot air and smoke traveled through the earthen channels, gently warming the floor above. The result? Monks reportedly abandoned traditional straw-stuffed mats, opting instead to nap directly atop the heated flagstones, much to the chagrin of ecclesiastical visitors, who confused steamy puffs rising from under robes for spiritual ecstasy, or satanic incantations. Later accounts caution novices not to kneel during vespers on the hippocaust stones, lest they risk third-degree burns on their cassocks. By the 14th century, several abbeys boasted steam-powered saunas so effective that pilgrims traveled hundreds of miles for a single hour of blessed warmth, though many complained of the acrid tang of chimney soot in the monastic broth. Another unintended side effect of cloistered heating: castle chimney, labyrinths, the great smoke maze. While peasants choked on candlelight and cowered in drafty hovels, castle architects played with a more elaborate toy: chimney labyrinths. Instead of a single flue leading straight to the roof, they carved a series of interconnected channels within thick curtain walls. One flue would carry smoke up several stories before branching off horizontally, depositing warmth into adjacent chambers before eventually exiting through a grand masonry stack. At Warwick and Caernarfon, these labyrinthine chimneys served dual purposes. Guards stationed along the flue branches detected enemy infiltration by listening for the echoes of approaching footsteps, an unintended acoustic bonus. Unfortunately, the complexity invoked its own hazards. When a hearth fire drew smoke into one branch, it often backdrafted into another wing, filling bedrooms with choking fumes and prompting midnight evacuations. Some chroniclers describe knights waking to find their swords sheathed in oily soot, necessitating impromptu battles against inanimate foes. The labyrinths, though ingeniously warm, were eventually simplified to avoid turning castles into pre-industrial smoke factories. Glazed window experiments: from oiled parchment to crystal panes windows, the medieval home's Achilles heel offered both light and a direct invitation to frost. Most townsfolk relied on stretched animal membranes, goat bladder or calf parchment, then oiled for translucency, but the wealthy sought permanence. Venetian merchants began importing thin glass panes in the 13th century, though these were as rare as hen's teeth. When installed in European estates, the panes frequently shattered under rapid temperature swings, or during boisterous feasts when torches swung too close. A handful of castles experimented with a crude double-pane setup: 2 layers of oiled cloth framed around a pane of tinted glass, separated by a narrow air gap. The proto-double glazing maintained indoor warmth surprisingly well, but air pockets often became breeding grounds for condensation, draping curtains in icy webbing each morning. Wittan Hall, minutes from King's Ely Hall in 1368, admonished the mason who fitted the green-tinted panes to learn the art of thawing before bragging of brilliance. It wasn't until the 15th century that clear Venetian glass became more affordable, but by then, many castles had already raised their experimental windows in favor of sturdier wooden shutters. Centralized bakehouse boilers, communal steam distribution. In some large towns, civic pride led to the construction of centralized steam houses adjacent to bakeries or brewhouses, industries that typically maintained roaring furnaces year-round. Municipal engineers tunneled ceramic pipes beneath streets, directing superheated steam into public squares and beneath key civic buildings: the Guildhall, the church, even the judge's bench. During winter sessions, defendants in cold stone courthouses could bask in dank, humid heat that seeped through cracks in the floorboards. The downside: steam leaks were explosive. In Dijon, circa 1422, a burst pipe under the cathedral's nave reportedly sent a geyser of steam into the altar steps, scalding choirboys and liquefying floor tiles in an instant. The bishop decreed that no town steam system should operate within 20 feet of consecrated ground. Nonetheless, towns boasting ample civic steam used the bragging right to host winter markets under covered arcades, attracting merchants eager to sell furs and spices in tempered comfort, so long as they heeded warnings about sudden hissing, betrayals from beneath the cobbles. Royal underfloor, heating, palaces with warming carpets. For monarchs and nobles who demanded luxury beyond straw walls, royal palaces unveiled true extravagance, underfloor heating encased in marble. In the grand halls of the Château de Blois, in Prague's royal palace, artisans layered fire brick channels beneath slabs of polished stone connected to massive wood-fired boilers in the basement. Servants fed logs through iron grates, and valves controlled the flow of hot air beneath reception rooms and galleries. These systems offered a warmth so constant that courtiers abandoned heavy cloaks indoors, leading to fashion upheavals. Ladies of the court flounced about in silk bodices, unaware that stones beneath their feet radiated enough heat to wilt flowers. Perched on windowsills, When winter guests penned letters home, they gushed about floors that teem with summer's embrace, unaware of the countless logs consumed daily to create the illusion. During the 100 Years' War, invading armies sometimes targeted these heating complexes first, knowing that depriving a castle of warmth would demoralize its occupants faster than ballista bolts. Alchemical floor. Vats, potion-infused thermal mats. Alchemists, not content with steam and smoke, ventured into thermal chemistry. In a few clandestine workshops in Alexandria-inspired Toledo, they concocted thermal mats impregnated with exothermic salts, mixtures that, when moistened, released heat through chemical reaction. These mats of cloth and powdered vermiculite were buried beneath straw mats and set alight with a sprinkle of water. The theory? Call forth synthetic warmth without fuel. The reality? Smell so foul that even unbathed nights retreated. Worse, the mats' heat peaked and collapsed within an hour, often emitting sulfurous fumes that sent families scrambling for fresh and freezing air. Kings financed trials, but the final verdict, inscribed in a charred journal found in King Alfonso's archives, reads simply, "Less scorching than useful, removed at once." Integration of salt brine, tanks, heat storage innovations, in salt-rich regions. Like Lorraine in the Württemberg Basin, miners and merchants experimented with brine tanks as thermal batteries. They filled deep stone cisterns with concentrated salt water, warmed by adjacent furnaces. At night, aqueducts fed the heated brine through hollow terracotta radiators embedded in living quarters. The bland salt solution retained warmth longer than fresh water, an early form of heat storage. This thermal reservoir method worked well, until a cold snap froze the water in the radiators, bursting the terracotta pipes in a loud series of cracks that locals likened to cannon fire. The ensuing flood of brine dissolved mortar joints, leading to slippery floors and salt-corroded metal fittings. After the costly repairs, towns reverted to wood-fired stoves, deeming salt's gift too corrosive to trust. Architectural windbreaks, deflecting the Arctic gale. Beyond stoves and boilers, simple architectural flourishes made a difference. In Breachesham and other Northumbrian hamlets, builders oriented streets in zigzag patterns, erecting staggered rows of houses that channeled northerly winds up and over rooftops. Narrow entryways called wind barrows funneled breezes through offset passages, reducing draft penetration into living rooms. Wattle and daub panels coated in lime plaster mixed with crushed animal hair replaced thatch in particularly gusty corridors. The lime hardened into a semi-hydrophobic shell, repelling snowmelt and minimizing infiltration. These subtle windbreak tactics, though invisible compared to roaring boilers, kept hearths burning brighter. Proof that sometimes the best heating innovation is simply keeping the cold out. Closing reflections, medieval heat's legacy. From monastic hippocausts to salt tank radiators, medieval towns pursued warmth with a blend of faith, folly, and far-sighted engineering. Their failures, exploding steam pipes, sulfurous mats, smoke-choked halls, stand as testament to a relentless drive. No human should shiver when fire exists, and in each misfire and triumph we see modern heating's roots. As you curl up under electric blankets or click your thermostat, spare a thought for the stonemasons, alchemists, and itinerant Fornakis who gambled life, limb, and ledger in pursuit of cozy hearths. They stirred boilers, carved flues, and chalked plans by candlelight, driven by the same simple wish that warms us today, to turn winter's freeze into a mild inconvenience rather than an existential threat. And with that, our 4-part chronicle of medieval winter survival draws to a close. May your floors remain warm, your chimney soot minimal, and your sense of historical absurdity sufficiently heightened to bring a smile when the draft returns. You've crossed deserts, battled dysentery, survived cholera outbreaks, and for what? A handful of glittering pebbles that promise instant riches but deliver exhaustion, heartbreak, and death. Think it sounds like an adventure? Think again. In January of 1849, over 80,000 hopeful souls poured into San Francisco Bay, eyes gleaming with dreams of gold. They arrived by sea and overland, tramping through the Sierra Nevada with nothing but a pickaxe, a pan, and an unshakable conviction that the next river bend would reveal untold fortune. But fortune, as these $20 dreamers discovered, was a cruel mistress. more likely to leave you soaked, starving, and delirious than batting your eyelids with nuggets. The first challenge was the journey itself. Steamboats choked on a fog and rotting wood as they crawled up the Sacramento River, spitting passengers into mosquito-ridden swamps where fevers lurked like hidden pickpockets. Overland trekkers slogged through 40 miles of uncharted desert, known as the 40-mile desert, with the water so scarce that dying oxen lined the trail like ironic signposts. For every man who arrived triumphant, 2 perished of thirst, lunacy, or a bullet from a panicked companion convinced you were after his last drop of water. Upon arrival, the chaos of San Francisco resembled a gold fever-struck circus. Wooden shacks sprouted overnight on muddy hillsides, then collapsed under their own weight, or under the weight of drunken miners attempting to dance. Tents flapped like distressed seagulls in gale winds, and boardwalks hastily nailed together sank into the mire at every step. As newcomers stomped through the knee-high mud, a booming cry went up, "Gold on the beach! Gold in the harbor!" Scores dropped their belongings and paddled into frigid waters with tin pans, only to find their toes numb and their pans empty. Accommodation was a fleeting luxury. A man could sleep in a canvas tent, if he could find one, and awaken at dawn to discover squatters had moved in, claimed the spot, and nailed him out. Hotels, where they existed, charged astronomical rates, $2 per night for a mattress wedged between 2 barrels with the promise of fresh water that turned out to be the brackish slop cooked from bay mist. For the frugal, sleeping under the stars meant risking rattlesnakes, thievery, or the city's newly minted justice system, which sentenced loiterers to a night in a makeshift jail. No bed, no blanket, just cold iron and regret. Once you managed a patch of ground to dig, the real slog began. Gold panning was a slow torture. Squat by a river's edge, shovel wet earth into your pan, swirl in icy water until only the heaviest flecks remained, and then lift your face to find a line of 10 impatient prospectors behind you, wrenching your arm and demanding your turn. Schisms formed instantly. Fights over river rights were settled with knives and clubs, and bodies sometimes sank into murky channels to become unmarked obstructions for the next unsuspecting newcomer. Digging deeper promised more gold, but also more complications. Sluice boxes clogged with gravel, pickaxes shattered on hidden quartz veins. Every miner carried 3 tools, a pan for the trickle of gold, a shovel for the muck, and a Bible, for hope, or for ultimate payment when fever struck. Winter rains turned hills into avalanches of sludge, sweeping sluices away like children's toys and burying men alive beneath tons of wet clay. Hypothermia set in before rescue parties could hack through the earth, and survivors emerged coated head to toe in gray cement, baptized by misery. Gold fever spawned its own economy, one that thrived on exploitation. With miners desperate for supplies, merchants charged outrageous prices, a pound of flour for $5, a can of beans for 10, a shovel for 20. Stoves sold for what a farmhand earned in a month. Children were put to work carrying bags of flour across treacherous boardwalks, earning their keep by risking broken ankles. Bakery ovens gaped like furnace throats, consuming wood at a rate that left the surrounding hills stripped of timber. By spring, watersheds were bald, and the price of firewood shot through the roof, leaving families shivering over dwindling embers. If you thought that was harsh, welcome to the world of hydraulic mining. Ingenious or insane, engineers blasted entire hillsides with pressurized streams of water. The thunderous roar consumed valleys, carved canyons, and turned rivers into milky torrents of silt. Miners wielded hoses the size of fire hydrants, blasting gravel and earth into sluice boxes downstream. But the environmental cost was staggering. Sediment-choked waterways, flooded farms, and buried towns under 50 feet of mining detritus. Crop yields collapsed. Settlers sued mining companies for damages only to find that the law, like gold, favored those who could pay. Life in a mining camp was a circus of vice and desperation. Saloons, and there were hundreds, popped up with names like the Golden Nugget and the Crimson Pickaxe. Inside, the air was a haze of tobacco smoke, gunpowder, and spilled spirits. Barmaids balanced 12 sarsaparillas on each arm, flinging drinks at soldiers, gamblers, and men with desperation in their eyes. Gambling tables rattled with the clack of ivory chips. Cards slid over sawdust floors coated in grime and blood. If you lost your pan, your shovel, or your shirt in a game, you might lose your life in a duel at dawn, followed by a hurried burial outside town limits, a skull-in-the-dirt epitaph to your gullibility. Gold prospecting was one of the few vocations where women could carve out a measure of power, if they survived. Boarding houses run by entrepreneurial women offered hot meals, a wash basin, and a lock on the door, luxuries unheard of for single men. Dressmakers stitched crinolines for ladies who survived the cattle drives, and laundresses charged $1 per shirt, worth the price to avoid the camp's notorious head lice outbreaks. But women faced their own dangers: gendered violence, kidnapping rings, and the daily exposure to men drunk on whiskey and entitlement. Few struck it rich, most eked out meager profits, reinvesting in mines only to watch their stakes washed away by torrential winter floods. Disease stalked every valley and gulch. Cholera, typhoid, and dysentery had free reign in camps without plumbing, toilets, or sanitation. Tents pitched near streams became breeding grounds for mosquitoes carrying malaria. Medical care was a trade controlled by quacks. Snake oil salesmen peddled golden elixir for gold-induced fever, fortified whiskey with a dash of mercury. Tin sheepherder doctors drilled holes in skulls to relieve pressure, bled patients with leeches, and amputated frostbitten fingers without anesthesia. Mortality rates in some camps approached 50%, and graves multiplied on hillsides faster than gold flakes in a pan. Crime exploded in the lawless frontier. Vigilante committees formed overnight, prosecuting suspected horse thieves and claim jumpers. Public hangings served as both deterrent and spectacle. Noose-swung bodies dangled from trees outside town, a grim welcome sign for new arrivals. Yet justice was fickle. If you had the right claim, your crimes were overlooked. If you dug only dirt, the hangman's rope awaited. Banks sprang up offering loans to prospectors at 50% annual interest, and debtors found themselves mortgaged to the wrong men, forced into indentured service in placer camps. And then there was disillusionment. After weeks, months, years of toil, most prospectors left with less than break even. They sold claims for a song, boarded leaky vessels bound for better fields in Oregon or Australia, and muttered curses at the Golden State. A precious few parlayed their finds into small fortunes, enough to build stores, buy farmland, or retire to San Francisco's burgeoning elite. Even they carried the scars of because they had seen friends starve, strike it rich only to be robbed, or die in a flash flood while cooking breakfast by the river. The landscape itself betrayed them. Abandoned mine shafts yawned like open graves, collapsing without warning. Tailings left hillsides barren. Rivers glimmered with deadly mercury used in gold extraction. Wildlife vanished. Forests were stripped for timber. Soil eroded into dust that blew across distant fields. The gold rush, sold as a path to quick wealth, became a monument to human folly. Streaked gullies carved by greed, ghost towns haunted by echoes of pickaxes and unfulfilled dreams. By 1855, the gold rush had peaked. Tens of thousands had passed through, leaving behind only scars on the land and legends in history books. California transitioned from a wild boom territory to an orderly state. Railways replaced wagon trains, commerce supplanted panning, agriculture fed the world. But the dream of gold remained, shimmering in the collective imagination, an enduring siren song promising instant riches while concealing the cost in blood, sweat, and tears. So, dear viewer, before you romanticize the golden age of prospectors, remember this. The gold rush was more likely to kill you than make you rich. For every miner who drifted home with pockets heavy and heart light, dozens returned empty-handed, hollow-eyed, with nothing but a tale of horror and regret, and some never returned at all, swallowed by disease, violence, or the land itself. In our next segment, we'll dive into the forgotten corners of the rush, female prospectors who defied expectations, Chinese laborers who faced brutal discrimination, and the environmental nightmares that still echo today. Until then, clutch your smartphone tightly, appreciate your uninterrupted Wi-Fi, and whisper a silent thank you that your biggest risk is a low battery, because in 1849, even hope could kill you. By now, you're either invigorated by the lurid promise of instant wealth or recoiling in existential dread. Good, because part 2 plunges deeper into the blood, the mud, and the madness of life as a 40-90er. We'll follow our ill-fated prospector, not a lucky leprechaun, but a grizzled everyman named Ezekiel Zeke Thompson, through the living nightmare of camp politics, the tyranny of miners' justice, and the gut-wrenching heartbreak of a lost claim. Strap yourself in. The river's cold, and so is the world he's stumbling through. Morning rituals, frost-crusted worries. Day breaks in a gold camp like a cold slap to the face. Zeke wakes in his tent, every inch of canvas stiff with frost. He rubs bleary eyes and unzips the flap, only to inhale a lungful of icy air, scented faintly with yesterday's whiskey and last night's vomit. Outside, campfires smolder in rings of blackened stones, casting pale orange halos on weary faces. The temperature hovers just above freezing, but wind gusts lash the hillside like whips, driving Zeke's hood down over his ears. He replaces last night's soaked socks with a pair still damp from the river, but they're better than nothing. He pulls on his leather boots, now cracking with cold, and steps into the muck, arms encased in ragged mittens stiff as board. Breakfast is a hastily constructed affair. Zeke dumps porridge flakes into a tin can, douses them with questionable water drawn from a nearby spring that doubles as the miner's latrine, and lights a scrap of paper beneath to boil. If he's lucky, a traveling butcher passed through camp yesterday and left a hunk of salted pork. Otherwise, it's flavorless gruel speckled with grit. He shovels the steaming mess between chattering teeth, thinking how a bowl of oatmeal at home once seemed like a treat, and now tastes like manna from heaven itself. Meanwhile, Camp Law reels to life. A man known only as Judge McGraw, an ex-miner who claims he once struck it rich and then lost everything in a game of Pharaoh, steps into the center ring. He pounds the stump of a post gavel, a rusty horseshoe rim, and declares the morning's docket: theft, claim jumping, and disturbing the peace by singing too loudly before dawn. The accused are dragged forward, often bound hand and foot, and faced with swift tribunal justice, a process often ending in a whipping, banishment, or public humiliation. Zeke watches the proceedings with a jaundiced eye, thankful he didn't accidentally camp on a neighbor's claim line. He tightens his coat collar, praying his sleeping spot doesn't wander into another man's imaginary rectangle of land. Claim, line tensions, property by pickaxe. Goldfields had no zoning laws beyond first come, first served. Every prospector staked his claim by nailing a crude wooden stake into the ground, painting his name in shaky letters. Conflict was inevitable. Zeke's claim may sit mere feet from his neighbors, but to that man, it might as well be the OK Corral. On this particular morning, Zeke encounters Old Man Reyes, a cantankerous veteran who arrived 2 weeks before him and claims that Zeke's pan-scraped furrows have crossed the invisible line into his territory. "Step back, boy," Reyes snarls, brandishing a pick handle like a musket. "This here dirt is mine. You want gold, you can get your own patch." Zeke points at the stake with his own shovel. "Well, Mr. Reyes," he replies, teeth chattering, "your stake's been leaning since last night's gale. Maybe that wind moved it for me." Reyes' face contorts like a resurrected demon. He lunges, Zeke ducks, swinging his shovel handle like a club. The two men wrestle in the mud, sending clods flying. Camp followers gather, forming a circle and placing bets on which man will end the early morning with fewer teeth. Judge McGraw returns, brandishing a pistol, and ends the melee with a warning shot into the air. "Hands off my courtroom!" Both men back away, panting, blood-spattered, but still clear on one fact. In the gold rush, property rights were enforced by fists and barrels of gunpowder, not inked deeds. The workday: grind, sludge, sweat, and silence. Once claim, boundaries are temporarily respected, the real labor begins. Zeke trudges to the rushing creek 5 miles downriver, his shoulders slumped beneath a load of pans, shovels, a pickaxe, and a patched canvas bucket that leaks more water than it holds. He follows the path where hundreds of others have trudged, turning a scramble of vegetation into a slick slime track. The creek pulses in a narrow gorge, snowmelt swelling its currents and chilling every exposed limb. Zeke braces himself on a moss-slick boulder, lifts the pan, scoops a shovelful of gravel, and submerges it in water. It's a meditative torture. Scoop, swirl, tip away sand and pebbles, and hope the remaining black sand bears gold flecks. Each motion numbs his fingertips anew. The water robs him of warmth faster than he can work. He repeats the process hundreds of times before his stomach rumbles. As the sun inches upward, The novelty of Panning's glacial pace fades into a dull agony. Cold drips down his spine, sweat collects under his patched canvas vest, and muscles ache from hunching over stone beds. Lunch is, surprise, more gruel, this time hand-me-down beans 5 days past their prime. He warms them against a flat rock heated by the midday sun, or tries to, because direct flame requires a fire, and local regulations forbid open fires near wooden shanties for fear of sparks. Instead, Zeke balances the tin can on a hot stone, hoping for enough warmth to render the beans edible. A hand-sized rock slips, and scalding steam erupts, sending him dancing backward and dropping the can into the creek. The beans sink, trailing rivulets of grime into the water. Zeke mutters a curse that echoes off canyon walls, then trudges back to his claim with empty stomach and heavier heart. Afternoon brings more digging. Zeke and 2 fellow prospectors form a buddy system to protect against thieves and rattlesnake bites. They take turns swinging pickaxes, cracking stubborn clay into chunks, loading wheelbarrows to haul spoil to a tailings pile. The chorus of metal on stone rings out like a chorus of Morse code to fortune, or warning. Every so often, one man climbs into the hole to inspect raw gravel, prying rocks with a handbar in search of gold veins. The hole sinks deeper each day, the walls slick with seepage. A misstep means sliding down into muck. A loose rock overhead could crush a helmet or break a collarbone. Yet they dig on, convinced tomorrow they'll hit pay dirt. Psychological warfare, hope and despair. The gold rush wasn't just a physical grind, it was a battle of nerves. Every pan that yields nothing chips away at a man's soul. Prospectors told tall tales around campfires of glittering streaks so thick you could scoop them by the shovelful. Zeke listened, entranced and tormented, measuring his own meager pan against these legends. Each glitterless swirl of water and sediment magnified his self-doubt. Maybe I'm cursed. Maybe this gold field's played out. Maybe I'm too slow. Mental health crises were common. Men stared blankly at riverbanks, rambling about phantom gold veins, or wandered off into pines muttering about secret creeks flowing with nuggets. Camp caretakers cobbled tin cups of whiskey laced with opium to calm nerves, an induced stupor often preferred to the cold reality. Zeke downs a shot of rot-gut whiskey at the makeshift saloon, watching as other men slide into drunken stupors, their eyes rolling back like frozen marbles. It helps, until the sun sets and the hangover, and the cold, returns with twice the force. Accidents and catastrophes, nature's indifference. No cautionary sign warned of flash floods and narrow ravines. Zeke and his partner Hank hear the rumble downstream, an ominous, low-pitched roar that could be boulders tumbling or rivers colliding. They drop tools and dash uphill with a dozen others. Behind them, a wall of brown water churns debris and logs. Sluices and tailings are swept away before their eyes. Men scramble like ants fleeing a deluge. One by one, bodies vanish in the maelstrom, some buried instantly, some carried downstream to drown or spew out by snapping currents. Minutes later, the creek returns to its normal width, leaving behind only mud banks strewn with wreckage and the mournful calls of survivors. Zeke stands dripping and shaken, realizing that the earth gives gold only to take human life in return. Avalanches, too, struck without warning. Snow-packed winter camps perched high on mountain benches could collapse in thundering cascades, tenting on a scree slope. Forget about the gentle wind lullaby, you're risking an alpine tomb. Prospectors learned, sometimes too late, to never build shelters in obvious run-out zones. Zeke witnessed an avalanche that buried 2 cottages of claim jumpers. Hours later, rescuers dug out the surviving pair, delirious and coated in snowmelt, shouting curses at both the mountain and their fellow men for digging too close to private property. The saloon ecosystem, vice as currency. When daylight faded, life shifted to the nearest saloon, rattling doors, flickering oil lamps, and floors slick with spilt beer. In the Dusty Pan, the largest tented tavern in Zeke's district, saloons jockeyed for business by offering free whiskey shots to new arrivals and hosting nightly entertainment. Fiddle music so loud it reverberated through cracked tent walls. Acrobatics performed on kegs, even brutal bare-knuckle fights for sport. Zeke sidles up to the bar, trying to appear calmer than he feels. The barkeep sloshes whiskey into a tin cup and adds a drop of old sugar. enough to make the liquor look palatable. Zeke downs it, flame roaring through his chest, and tosses a silver dime on the counter. Nearby, cards slap against tables, chip stacks clatter, and men shout over accusations of cheating. Anything. Faro games, 3-card monte, dice, served as distraction from freezing nights and fruitless days. Those who lost their money resorted to offering valuable personal items, pocket watches, flints, even a promise of future claim rights. Debts hung over heads like a guillotine blade. Inability to pay meant indentured labor or thumping lashes if the gentleman's agreement wasn't settled before sunrise. Medical nightmares, quackery, and deprivation. When prospectors fell ill or got hurt, and they did with shocking frequency, the nearest doctor was usually an itinerant charlatan. Dr. Malthus Grimshaw advertised his elixir of golden youth, a tincture guaranteed to cure gold rush fever, dysentery, and bullet wounds, all for a modest fee of 2 ounces of gold dust per dose. His clinic was set up in a canvas marquee, stalls lined with crudely painted signs promising miraculous cures. In reality, Grimshaw's elixir was whiskey spiked with laudanum. His primary treatment for broken bones was to lash them with strips of torn sheets and pray to the Almighty. Zeke once watched a man with a compound leg fracture bound into a splint of bark and rope, only to develop gangrene. The doctor's solution: amputate with a rusty blade, without anesthesia. The man screamed louder than a mine collapse, and his screams echoed through the valley for hours afterward. Within days, infection claimed him anyway. Funerals were modest affairs: a rough pine coffin, a brief prayer over the grave, and a handful of dirt thrown atop the lid. The earth cooled quickly in the shade of pines, sealing miners in final rest, far from family and dignity. Camp, society, unlikely alliances, and unexpected friendships. Amid all the brutality and greed, small bonds of solidarity emerged. Zeke found camaraderie with a French-Canadian named Marcel, who taught him to break sticks and pack kindling under river rocks to start an emergency fire when stranded. Marcel, in turn, begged Zeke to show him how to split quartz, his guide to finding tiny yellow flecks. They formed an uneasy but effective partnership, combining Marcel's knack for fire with Zeke's patient panning technique. Nearby, a Chinese laundryman named Li Wei had set up shop, offering washing services for the staggering price of $1 per shirt. In return, Wei sold dumplings that warmed frozen bellies when Zeke couldn't face another bowl of beans. Despite facing brutal racism, white miners often slashed the laundryman's tents and spread rumors of opium dens. Li Wei persevered, forging small friendships across cultural lines. Zeke learned to barter pouches of gold dust for steamed buns and, in exchange, taught Wei how to spot the heaviest black sands upstream. Twilight, realizations, dreams deferred. As the sun sinks behind jagged peaks, Zeke trudges back to camp, his canvas bucket empty and his back aching. He joins fellow prospectors around a dying brazier, an iron pot suspended over embers smothered in charcoal dust. Each man holds a tin cup of thin soup, trading stories of that one giant nugget he almost held. Laughter crackles between shivers, curses fly as claims erode, tools break, and luck runs dry. Zeke finds a corner of his torn canvas tent, crawls into his threadbare blanket, and stares at the frost forming inside the flap. He thinks of home. His wife's smile, a sturdy log cabin with a real fireplace, winter quilts stuffed with goose down, and a pantry stocked with cornmeal and salted hams. He wonders if the chance at gold was worth his daily humiliation, or whether his gamble on fortune has cost him everything that truly mattered. As stars glitter overhead, Zeke drifts into a fitful sleep, dreams swinging between nuggets large enough to buy back his dignity and images of his body stiff and frozen on a distant hillside. The night air cuts through his thin blanket like a blade, and the only warmth he has is the fever in his mind, fueled by hope and clinging to the faint possibility that tomorrow his pan will gleam gold. Stay tuned for part 3, where we'll follow Zeke into the brutal politics of mining districts, explore the rise of corporate hydraulic operations that crush small-time prospectors, and reveal how laws, both written and unwritten, decided who lived and who died. Until then, clutch your own dreams of fortune carefully. In the gold rush, the only guarantee was suffering, and maybe, very rarely, a glittering speck of redemption. Zeke stirred awake to the crack of Judge McGraw's makeshift gavel. A rusty horseshoe rim pounded on a tree stump, summoning everyone to the claim line meeting. He shivered into his frost-caked waistcoat and trudged over, half asleep and half filled with dread, to hear the latest edict from the Mining District Committee, a self-appointed gang of prospectors wielding more authority than any official in Sacramento. Here, on this muddy plateau, democracy meant 3 men with rifles, 2 with whiskey breath, and 1 loudmouth who claimed to be a lawyer back east. Together, they wrote laws faster than Zeke's pan could catch gold, and enforced them with gunpowder rather than ink. This morning's headline: all miners must pay a road maintenance levy of $2 per month, ostensibly to improve the trail in and out of camp. The committee detailed that the levy would help fill potholes that reformed within hours of any rainfall, rendering the work pointless. Even so, failure to pay meant 1 night in the county jail, a canvas tent with no bedding, and a single lantern fueled by rancid tallow. Some miners, particularly those who had already spent every last cent on a claim, opted for jail over the levy. Their absence thus solved the committee's pothole problem by reducing the number of wagons rattling down the road. Zeke watched his neighbor, Marta Ruiz, hand over her last gold dust pouch reluctantly. Marta, a Mexican immigrant who'd been panning since the days when California was Mexico, scowled as the committee secretary weighed her dust on a shaky scale that looked more like a haunted carnival attraction than anything reliable. They praised her contribution to civic order as she retreated, shoulders squared against the morning chill. Marta's gaze met Zeke's, no words needed. They both knew the committee's true aim was lining their own pockets. Minutes later, an entirely separate meeting convened at the Crown and Pickaxe, the only saloon with enough spare boards to hold a proper roof. Here, local entrepreneurs demanded permission to build stamp mills, giant wooden mechanisms that crushed ore with iron stamps. Mills required water diverted by long canals, threatening every river claim downstream. Mill owners promised to pay 5 cents for every pound of crushed ore, double the rate of panning, but deducted exorbitant transportation fees, labor surcharges, and dust settling charges. By the time Zeke did the math, he'd end up owing the mill more than it returned in gold. Panic set in among independent miners. Without a stamp mill nearby, their rich gravel pockets, if they were lucky enough to have any, sat idle. When the committee granted permits, corporate-style operations rolled in. Wooden sluice boxes lined with riffles, steam-powered rockers, and wheelbarrow teams hauling ore to crushing stations. Prospective small-time prospectors found themselves squeezed out, unable to compete with the economies of scale. Zeke and his comrades had 2 options: join the stamp mill syndicate as beneath the boss laborers for 18 cents a day, or risk total ruin by clinging to their hillside claims without heavy gear. As if that weren't enough, the California legislature, in a rare show of efficiency, had passed the foreign miners tax earlier that year. Under its provisions, every non-American miner paid $3 per month, triple the levy for citizens, and was forbidden from testifying in court. Chinese, Mexican, and Chilean miners were especially targeted. Swirling rumors claimed the tax existed solely to encourage foreigners to return home, though in practice it encouraged them to hide their gold in boots, gamble in secret, and bribe tax collectors. Many Asians pooled resources, renting communal sluice sites where they could pay the tax collectively. Still, local vigilantes raided their camps, confiscating dust and burning tents in broad daylight, confident the victims lacked legal recourse. Zeke witnessed a terrible scene one afternoon. Dozens of Chinese miners, tall, lean men who panned with astonishing finesse, lined up before the tax collector's tent. They presented their dust pouches, bright against the dull canvas, only to be informed that the tax rate had accidentally been increased to $5. When one brave man protested, pointing out the printed notice read $3, the collector drew his pistol, fired into the dirt at the man's feet, and snarled, "Scratch it off or get out." The miners scraped their pouches, hands trembling with cold and rage, and paid the inflated demand. On their way out, they paused to scoop up the spilled dust. Fewer dollars, more humiliation. Meanwhile, large mining companies, backed by San Francisco investors, were employing hydraulic mining on a grand scale. Powerful nozzles called monitors blasted away entire hillsides with pressurized water drawn from miles of ditches and flumes. The roar of rushing water sounded like mountain thunder. The cascade of mud and rock poured downstream, carving new canyons overnight. Zeke's upstream claim, once a promising patch of gravelly soil, became a churning whirlpool of debris. He rushed in boots misaligned by shifting ground, only to find his pans submerged under a foot of sludge that even a steam engine would balk at processing. The environmental devastation was staggering. Rivers clogged with sediment altered courses, flooded farmlands, and drowned low-lying camps. Farmers downstream sued mining companies, claiming damages for lost crops and destroyed irrigation ditches. The courts, however, sympathized with companies that paid good legal fees, ordering small farmers to seek relief through legislative channels, a measure akin to handing beggars reparations after they've already starved. Bitter conflicts erupted. Dam owners upstream dynamited flumes to save pasture land, and miners retaliated by burning barns along the watercourse. The once peaceful Sacramento Valley became a battleground where water, and the gold it carried, was the ultimate prize. In the mining town saloons, talk turned to claim jumping, an underhanded practice of forcibly ejecting small prospectors from rich deposits. Armed gangs, known as claim jumpers, arrived overnight, hired muscle to intimidate needy singles, and set fire to cabins when their targets resisted. Zeke's friend Hank, a widower who'd settled on a promising creek bed, fell victim one night. A contingent of jumpers arrived with 6-shooter pistols, ransacked his tools, and warned him not to return. When Hank tried to defend his claim, he was shot in the thigh and left bleeding under the stars. No magistrate ever heard his case. Hank lacked the $50 fee required to file a suit. Zeke found him the next morning, wrapped in a blood-stained blanket and muttering curses at every white man within sight. Worse still was the corrosive influence of vigilante justice. With official law enforcement stretched thin or complicit, miners banded together into citizens' regulators, who arrested suspected thieves, counterfeiters, or claim jumpers. Trials lasted minutes. Verdicts were shouted from a plank with a noose at one end. Sometimes the guilt was real. Often it was just a vendetta disguised as justice. Public executions, lynchings usually, drew crowds that cheered as bodies swayed in the breeze. Towns posted hangman's guidelines on trees, listing offenses punishable by death, murder, rape, horse theft, and in some cases, conduct unbecoming a gentleman miner. Zeke once saw 2 men hanged for selling substandard shovels stamped with high-quality marks. The crowd walked away satisfied, spoons clattering against tin cups of grog. Amid the chaos, women found niches of relative security, if not prosperity, in hotel boarding houses. Miss Sarah Whitman, a former schoolteacher from Boston, commanded $5 per night for a bed in her 2-story wood-frame boarding house. Her establishment, replete with clean sheets, a communal washstand, and Sunday dinners, was a haven for miners desperate for comfort. Word spread that Sarah's door, marked with a discreet blue lantern, offered safety against claim jumpers and a place to recuperate from bullet wounds. For Zeke, a night in Sarah's refuge, if he could afford it, meant the difference between deep chills and a solid night's sleep, allowing him to muster the strength for another day at the creek. But the boarding house economy wasn't immune to the same regulations. The mining committee decreed that lodgers be registered and pay an additional stranger tax. Sarah argued vehemently that her guests were not strangers, but hard-working citizens. She refused to collect the tax, and her ledger entries quietly recorded each omitted dollar. The committee responded by fining her $100, more than she'd ever made in a month. Sarah's solution? She added a boarder's benefit fee of $2 per guest per night, cleverly siphoning the same revenue back into her pockets. The committee, satisfied with the fee's appearance on official receipts, allowed her to continue, proof that even crooked governance can be gamed by sharper wits. By late autumn, Zeke faced a grim tally. His pan catches amounted to less than $7 worth of gold dust. His expenses, levies, saloon rounds, replacement tools topped 30. The debt collected on his debts like interest-bearing snowdrifts, swallowing his meager earnings faster than any mine collapse. Local merchants reassured him, next spring, the snowmelt will flush out the mother lode. But spring carried its own horrors, flooding rivers, washed out flumes, and mudslides that buried entire claims under tons of rocky slurry. Disillusionment set in. Zeke realized that the gold rush wasn't a grand frontier spectacle, but a brutal business run by men with bigger capital, bigger guns, and bigger stakes. He could sell his claim for a pittance, or toss his gear in the nearest bonfire and walk away. Many did. Camps emptied by midsummer as prospectors slunk off to ranch work, shopkeeping, or the next rumor of riches in Colorado. A few stayed on, turning from dreamers into grizzled card sharps, fence-riding bandits eking out a living by other men's misfortune. As Zeke packed his belongings into a battered wagon, he paused by the skeleton of Marta's claim cabin. She'd moved on 2 days earlier, scribbling in the land register that she'd sold out for humane consideration. Maybe she'd heard of new strikes in the Sierra foothills. Maybe she'd tired of the constant anxiety, the jackboot politics, and the moral decay that came with gold. Zeke left the cabin's door ajar as a gesture of solidarity. Claim jumping is one thing, he thought, but stealing hope is a crime we all share. By the time he reached the main trail out of the camp, he decided to head south to Los Angeles, where the citrus orchards promised wages for honest work, and far less chance of being lynched over a crooked shovel. He glanced back at the empty tents, the flattened saloon, and the mud-slick streets. Somewhere in that chaos lay enough gold to change a man's life, but only if he could survive the politics, the profiteers, and the perpetual fear. Zeke knew he'd take his chances with orange groves over the creek's cold currents any day. Part 4 will trace Zeke's journey beyond the hills, into the smoke-filled saloons of Los Angeles, the campaigns for miners' rights in fledgling California politics, and the ultimate question, was any of it worth the price? Join us next time to discover how a gold-stained dream can lead a man into unexpected alliances, bitter betrayals, and perhaps a new kind of fortune. Until then, keep your picks close and your wits closer, because in the Old West, the sharpest edge often wore no steel. Zeke crested the final hill as dawn broke over the rolling orange groves outside Los Angeles, and for the first time in months, the sun felt less like a foe and more like an indifferent acquaintance. He'd arrived with nothing but his battered wagon, a bag half full of cheap tools, and a heart full of cynicism. The citrus orchard spread before him like a fever dream, perfect green leaves studded with golden fruit, irrigated by neat canals instead of mud-clogged flumes, intended by families who seemed to work without fear of being shot at dawn. If he'd known how sweet the air smelled here, jasmine, orange blossom, and the faint aroma of adobe bricks baking in the sun, he might never have left his claim camp in the first place. He rolled into town on wheels squeaking like rusty pianos. Los Angeles in late 1850 was still a dusty pueblo under American rule, its population a mosaic of Californios, Americans, Mexicans, and a handful of Asians chasing their own fortunes. Main Street, which passed for a thoroughfare, was a single lane of packed earth lined with adobe houses, storefronts hastily erected from lumber shipped around Cape Horn, and the occasional saloon bold enough to import Kentucky bourbon. Horses and burros wandered freely, and women in hoop skirts shaded peddlers hawking fresh tortillas, salted meats, or porcelain tea sets for those poring over the latest edition of the California newspaper. Zeke's first move was pragmatic: find honest work that paid reliable wages. He spotted a man in a wide-brimmed hat overseeing a small crew laying irrigation ditches. Zeke sauntered over and offered his services, pitching himself as an experienced hand with shovels and picks. The foreman, a sun-leathered Mexican named Julio, eyeballed him like a gringo scarecrow. "We need strong backs, not stories of gold," Julio said, pointing to a trench that ran 15 feet long and a foot wide. Zeke nodded vigorously and joined the crew. The ditch digging was backbreaking but straightforward. Shovel earth into wheelbarrows, tip loads aside, tamp the bottom smooth, and repeat. At day's end, Zeke's arms felt like lead bands. His back protested with angry knots. Yet he relished the absence of gunfire, the security of a midday meal cooked over a steady fire, and the knowledge that his pay, $2 for a 10-hour day, would reach his calloused hand without being skimmed by vigilante taxes or levies. He spent his lunch break tasting fresh tortillas stuffed with queso fresco and chorizo, washed down with horchata so sweet it made his teeth ache. In a good way. After a week, Zeke had enough wages to rent a room above a tiny cantina owned by Senora Martinez, a widow from Sonora who charged $3 per week and promised 3 meals a day. Her rooms were modest, a cot with a thin wool blanket, a window shutter for ventilation, and a sturdy wooden door that locked without resorting to rope and nails. Even better, her meals consisted of bean stew, fresh corn tortillas, and chicken raised on her small backyard coop. Comfort food that felt like home, minus the cold nights and the constant dread of avalanches or flash floods. But old habits die hard. Zeke found himself drifting toward the saloons at sunset, drawn by the clink of glasses and the hum of violin reels. He sat at the bar of El Paseo, swirling whiskey in a mug, and noticing how the clientele here differed from the godforsaken camps up north. Here, a man wore hope on his sleeve, not desperation. Some drank to unwind after a day's honest labor. Others played cards to pass an idle hour. When arguments broke out, fists flew momentarily before cooler heads. Often Senora Martinez's burly nephew intervened. There were no hangings on Main Street, no masked claim jumpers bursting through walls. It was a civilized chaos, and Zeke almost felt he could learn to like it. His respite, however, was temporary. Rumors of a new strike near the San Gabriel Mountains drifted through the cantina like smoke, tempting veterans of the rush with promises of untapped deposits. Julio's crew, who paid their bills digging ditches, discussed giving it a go after harvest season. Even Senora Martinez's nephew, whose name was Rafael, dreamed aloud of buying a small claim and hitting it big. Zeke felt the old itch, the idea of sleeping under canvas again, of hearing the thunder of hydraulic monitors, of trading steady wages for the 1 in 1,000 chance at a fortune. He forced himself to silence that voice and remembered the $100 he had in savings, enough to start a tiny orchard plot of his own, or to send home if he ever missed Wyoming in summer. Instead, Zeke threw himself into local politics, unexpectedly but uncommonly his next frontier. California was a new state grappling with law, order, land rights, and the wrangling of miners' demands. Zeke attended town hall gatherings under a starlit pavilion of lanterns, where crisply dressed lawyers argued over water rights and fellow former prospectors demanded representation. He learned that the same vigilance committees which had terrorized camps up north now argued in court for equitable water distribution to farmers and small ranchers. The irony wasn't lost on him. Men who once lynched claim jumpers were now voting along party lines, debating taxation, and forging alliances with Californios, whose ancestors had farmed these lands before the gold rush began. Zeke found his voice at a meeting of the newly formed Farmers and Laborers League. He spoke of ditch digging, irrigation management, and the necessity of keeping mining companies from diverting too much water upstream. His words resonated. Dozens of farmers had lost crops to excessive sluice runoff, and miners' political muscle intimidated the few who protested. When Zeke described the scene in Sacramento, where Chinese laborers were robbed by vigilantes and local courts turned blind eyes, a hush fell. A local judge, donning a black frock coat, stood and pledged to introduce legislation protecting all honest workers, regardless of origin. It was the first time Zeke believed a law might matter more than a rifle. The legislative process moved slowly. Bills were drafted, committees formed, and lobbyists, representing mining syndicates, pressed their case with both gold coins and veiled threats. Zeke traveled to San Francisco for a hearing at the state capitol building, a grand structure of white stone impediments echoing classical temples. There he witnessed a spectacle unmatched by any camp trial, legislative debate witnessed by city elites, newspapers scribbling every quotation, and the governor himself presiding over arguments on the assembly floor. Miners' bills clashed with farmers' bills. Supporters on both sides waved petitions signed by thousands, men who once kept vigilante justice in their back pockets. Meanwhile, Zeke continued tending his small orchard plot, just 10 trees representing his savings and his faith in steadier returns. He pruned limbs, dug irrigation furrows, and watched buds swell into fragrant blossoms each spring. The orchard became his sanctuary, a place where success meant a bountiful harvest of citrus rather than a flash flood of mud. He discovered that the patience required to grow fruit, months of watching, waiting, pruning, surpassed the day labor sprint of gold panning. Each tree was a contract with the future, a promise that steady work could yield sweeter rewards than the fickle lure of gold. By 1855, the legislative drive bore fruit. California passed the Water Rights Act, establishing districts to regulate diversions and protect small users. More importantly, it directed mining companies to build settling basins, minimizing debris washed into rivers. Hydraulic mining was curtailed, and companies pressed for compensation, an irony that delighted Zeke, who felt justice had finally caught up with the wild tactics of his rushing days. Chinese and Mexican laborers gained partial representation through new laws outlawing the foreign miners' tax, though enforcement varied. Zeke attended a celebratory gathering in the farmers' hall, where banners proclaimed rights for all workers, and Senora Martinez toasted him with horchata spiked with aguardiente. He raised his glass, eyes misting at the thought that a community could one day value labor over gold. The orchard flourished. By the 6th year, Zeke's 10 trees yielded enough oranges to support his modest lifestyle and hire 2 laborers from the local pueblo, families who saved the wages to educate their children. He built a small wooden packing shed and shipped crates down to San Diego and northward by steamer. The name Thompson's Citrus appeared alongside established groves in the Los Angeles directory, earning him respect as both a settler and an entrepreneur. He invited Julio, the ditch-digging foreman who had first hired him, to share in profits, repaying the kindness that set him on this path away from the river's edge. Yet Zeke never forgot those months in the Sierra foothills. He kept his battered pan and shovel in a corner of the packing shed, the metal dulled by rust and memories. Once a year, on the anniversary of his departure, he'd walk those tools through the orchard trees and reflect on the broken promises of the gold rush. Friend turned enemy, brawls over invisible lines, the environmental scars, and the lives lost for specks of metal. Then he'd look at the vibrant fruit around him and nod to the trees, which asked nothing more than water and care. In the final chapter of his life, Zeke served a term on the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors. He advocated for public schools, fair water distribution, and restoration of lands devastated by hydraulic mining, efforts he had begun north of the bay. His rustic background earned him both admiration and derision. Some called him the prospector turned politician. Others sneered that he'd never escape his grubby past. He took it in stride, reminding himself, and anyone who asked, that a man's worth lay not in the nuggets he found but in the communities he built. When he died peacefully in 1884, Zeke left behind a grove sprawling over 5 acres, a legacy of steady growth rather than sudden fortune. His obituary praised a pioneer who turned gold fever into golden oranges, and children in Los Angeles schools learned of his role in forging water laws that tamed California's wilderness. The pan and shovel remained in the family, eventually donated to the local historical society under glass, alongside early forged tools and mining maps. Tour guides would point at them and quote Zeke's favorite saying, "Gold will kill you faster than anything else in these hills, but oranges, if you tend them right, will feed you for life." So, dear viewer, if you ever feel the itch for quick riches, remember Ezekiel Thompson's tale, the man who traded fevered dreams for furrowed rows, who found that the sweetest reward wasn't a heavy pan, but a heavy-laden branch bending under its fruit. The gold rush promised billions in dust. It delivered death, despair, and only rare redemption. But out of its chaos grew towns, laws, and orchards that fed generations. And that, perhaps, is the greatest fortune of all. You wake up at dawn, not to birdsong, but to the crack of a whip, and realize your life isn't your own. No citizenship, no rights, no hope. Only endless labor under Athenian sun. Sounds delightful? Think again. Part 1. Born somewhere on the wrong side of a war or kidnapped by pirates, you arrive in Athens shackled, sold at auction under the jeering cries of proud citizens flipping bronze coins as casually as they toss away your freedom. The Agora, Athens' bustling marketplace, transforms you into chattel, a display item with a price tag dangling from your wrist. You stand naked on a wooden platform, squinting at the bright sunlight reflecting off gleaming marble temples, feeling every eye on you like a branding iron. Behind you, a sign boasts, "Excellent domestic slave, experienced in loom, pottery, and foot massage, inquire within." As you tremble, a well-dressed citizen plucks you from the crowd and tosses a handful of drachmas at the auctioneer, sealing your fate. Your new master, Callimachus, is a middle-class hoplite with more pride than prudence. He's bought you for domestic duties, fetching water at dawn, grinding barley for his family's daily porridge, and scrubbing his olive oil slick floors until they gleam brighter than the Parthenon at noon. The moment you stumble into his courtyard, olive tree roots twisting through cracked stones, you sense that mercy is a stranger in this household. Your bare feet press into cold mortar. The courtyard air tastes of sweat and iron. Ignorant of your name, your master calls you simply Omicron, the scratched letter marking your price class. Any attempt to protest or show fear draws a sharp blow from his leather sandal or the crack of a rough-knotted whip. Dawn breaks relentlessly every day. At first light, you shoulder a heavy clay amphora and trudge to the communal well. Fellow slaves jostle around you, their shoulders stooped under identical jars. Conversations are whispers, rumors of harsher masters, of slaves who plotted escape only to be crucified. Yes, crucified on the road to discourage runaways. You lower your vessel into the well, water lapping like mocking laughter, and hoist it back onto your shoulder. Already your muscles ache from yesterday's chores, hauling firewood up 3 flights of stone steps to the upper courtyard where Callimachus's wife demands blazing hearth fires by mid-morning. Back at the house, you pour water into a shallow basin for your master's ablutions. He sits regally on a carved stool, wreath of laurel at his brow, dripping olive oil and sweat from his face. You cradle his foot in your hand and scrub. Each grain of sand embedded in his sandal straps grinds against your palm. If you miss a tough callus, his toes flex and crush your fingers as punishment. Once his hygienic ritual ends, he tosses the basin aside and instructs you to begin grinding barley in the heavy stone mortar. You knead the grain with a circular motion, grinding it repeatedly until it transforms into flour that tastes like dusty grief. You pause only when a pomegranate tree's shadow creeps across the courtyard stones, reminding you how long midday lasts without shade. By mid-morning, Callimachus's grown son arrives impatient. He needs fresh barley cakes for his symposium. You shape the dough into flat rounds and slide them into a small clay oven. Flames roar. You warm your hands at the mouth, grateful for a moment of comfort before the heat sears your forearms. When the cakes are done, you carry them on a wicker tray to the dining alcove, where the son and his friends recline on cushioned couches. Their laughter echoes off painted plaster walls, adorned with scenes of Dionysian revelry, an artful reminder that gods and nobility exempt themselves from the toil that has become your life. Your next task is weaving. A loom dominates the corner of the courtyard under a canvas awning, its warp threads taut and unforgiving. Callimachus's wife, Myrine, hands you bundles of dyed wool, bright crimson from Kirim's insects, deep blue from crushed murex snails. You thread the shuttle, your thumbs raw from repeated motion. Each thread you pass under and over takes you further from freedom. Myrine stands behind you, supervising, her long fingers twitching like claws whenever the pattern falters. A single misweave sends her fingertips smashing across your knuckles. Your eyes sting, your vision blurs. Yet you smother a cry, for any complaint brings harsher lashes and perhaps a trip to the Iron Master on Piraeus Road, where refractory slaves get branded on the cheek with a red-hot rod. Midday shifts into afternoon. Just as the sun reaches its zenith, you are yanked from the loom for an inspection. Myrine unfurls the warp. Stripes must align, colors must pop. She runs a polished fingernail along the fabric's edge, looking for loose strands. You stand motionless, sweat running down your spine, as she pronounces the cloth adequate and sends you to clean the lunch dishes. Bronze plates still slick with oil and bitter herbs. Each plate you scrub yields dents and grates that you smooth with sand and vinegar, hoping to please her. But the silver platters of your master's prestigious guests remain your greatest dread, for misplacing even a single leaf of lettuce might mean your nose gets split, so that sneezes sound like battle horns. After washing, you trim and pack the son's satchel, a small piece of barley bread, a wedge of goat cheese, dried figs picked by the family gardener. He stomps away to join his friends at the agora. You linger, exhausted, watching as the city's bustle teems around you. Athenian citizens in flowing chitons haggle over fish. Magistrates gleam under the porticos. Philosophers perch on steps debating virtue's nature. None meet your eye. You're invisible, an invisible cog in a grand machine moving inexorably toward democracy that excludes you. Your afternoon responsibilities include yard maintenance. You sweep fallen olive leaves and prune wild vines that threaten to overtake the marble balustrades. Callimachus paid sculptors to carve reliefs of Athena and Nike. Now mottled with moss, you must scrub away. You kneel on one knee, elbow pressed into cold stone, scrubbing with a wire brush until the goddess's shield gleams. The smell of sulfur and stone dust fills your lungs, each breath another reminder of the dust you'll inhale daily until your chest caves in. Late afternoon brings errands beyond the courtyard. You accompany the household's elderly nurse to the physician's house, a cramped space stowed with animal skins, jars of crushed herbs, and the pungent scent of unguent. He extracts a vial of poppy wine for Callimachus, instructing the nurse on dosage. You carry the precious liquid back, careful not to spill a drop. A tumble down a step or a slip on worn mosaic tiles could cost you more than your life. It could cost you sanity, as spilled poppy wine might prompt the physician's fury, or worse, claim you as a patient in his crude surgical tent at the Pnyx. Evening approaches, and you begin the final, most grueling chore, lighting the oil lamps throughout the house. Each lamp holds a puddle of olive oil in a shallow bronze cup balanced on a stand. You dip separate wicks into the oil and ignite them with a burning rag. Flickering lights cast long shadows of slaves moving from room to room. The drawing room, where Callimachus entertains guests, receives your meticulous attention. Every lamp trimmed, every flicker chased away. An errant spark landing on the fine tapestries woven by slave hands like yours could ignite disaster. If fire erupts, slaves bear the blame, and flames can consume not just the house, but your life. Finally, you retire to the slave quarters, 3 low rooms behind the servants' kitchen. The walls are mud brick, the floor hard-packed earth. You collapse onto a wooden bench covering your face with a thin wool blanket, the same one that shudders against rats through the night. Your companions lie beside you, a grizzled rower from Samos, a young thief from Corinth, a mourning widow captured in war. We exchange wordless looks, hollow eyes glazed by exhaustion. Outside, down the narrow lane, echoes of Athenian merriment drift from taverns. You wonder if those clinking amphorae toasts are worth your tears. Sleep comes fitfully. Your dreams flicker with torches in the Piraeus dockyards, the crack of chains in Bronze Age mines, and the mocking forms of Athenians dancing on stylized amphorae, clad in togas, turning your fate into art. At dawn, you'll wake to the same routine. Water, grinding, weaving, scrubbing, errands, lamps. You'll hear the cocks crow, the fishmonger's bawl, the philosopher's call for justice, all while chained to a life that offers none. In this first part, you've glimpsed the daily convulsions of slavery in ancient Athens, the auction block's humiliation, the backbreaking labor, the omnipresent threat of violence, the invisible existence amid one of history's greatest democracies. In part 2, we'll explore the merciless punishments for disobedience, the hidden economy of subversion, and the faint sparks of rebellion that flickered beneath the sandals of those who dared to dream of freedom. Until then, remember, in Athens' golden age, liberty was a trophy for some, while for you, it remained an unreachable star, glaring from a sky you could only gaze upon in chains. When your feet no longer ache from the morning's march to the well, you learn that mercy has another face, discipline. Today it comes in the form of Melanes, the overseer, a stocky Spartan exile who delights in enforcing Callimachus's whims with the enthusiasm of a butcher brandishing cleavers. At the crack of a bullwhip, you're summoned from your quarters, blinking in the gray dawn, to gather the broken pottery shards littering the kitchen courtyard. Each piece must be carefully swept into woven baskets. No shard may be left behind, lest a stray slipper cut a guest. Melanes glowers as you drop a fragment. He bellows the count downward like a death knell. Your heart pounds as you scoop the last sliver. Only then does he snap his whip handle against his palm and grunt his approval. With shards secured, you shoulder 2 baskets and stumble to the potter's workshop. There, you dump the cracked fragments onto a vast stone slab, where apprentices from various households reassemble broken urns for recycling. You sift through the debris, separating handle from rim, rim from body, even as the wind whips grains of red clay into your eyes. By the time you finish, your tunic is dust, your lungs gritty. Back in the courtyard, Melanes inspects your haul, snapping his whip over his head with each misplaced curved shard until you hear the leather crack just an inch from your scalp. You steel yourself, correct the stack, and he nods once, as if surprised that a slave could achieve competency. Next comes the fieldwork, harvesting the small plot of garden Callimachus cultivates for olives, grapes, and herbs. By law, each Athenian household may maintain only a modest garden, Larger plots are leased from nearby farmers for extravagance. You trudge across terraced beds, hand-weeding roots that seek to reclaim the sun, and tie young vines to trellises while Melanie's cracks his whip whenever a weed escapes your notice. Your hands blister on hemp twine. Your calves burn from repeated crouching. Midway through, the master's daughter, Sophia, barely 12 but already familiar with mood-snipping slaves, skips past, her golden curls bouncing as she tosses you a single fig. "Quick snack," she chirps. You pocket the sweet fruit, knowing well the risk of stealing from a child. But hunger shrieks louder than fear. The fig's flavor bursts in your mouth, a fleeting victory against your existence. The taste of freedom distilled into one small sweetness. By noon, you collapse by a grapevine arbor to inspect the morning's harvest. A few cups of plump, pale grapes meant for Marine's tartlets. You pop a couple into your mouth, letting the juice run down your chin until Melanie's shadow looms overhead. He wrenches the vine aside and demands, "What's this, Omicron? Wine for your belly?" You swallow quickly, sore cheeks hollow, and stammer, "Just checking quality, sir." He sneers and jabs you with the back of his hand. "I could report you to Callimachus. You know what that means." You nod, fearing the worst. A stint in the Nix prison, where slaves convicted of eating master's fruit spend days in dank cells without food or water. Shaken, you retrace your steps to the courtyard, where the looms stand waiting. The afternoon's task, weaving a new tapestry for the dining alcove, a gift for Callimachus from an influential neighbor. The patron insisted on depicting Theseus's battle with the Minotaur, the hero's sinewy muscles, the monster's snarling maw, the labyrinth's twisting corridors. Myrine provided your thread palette, black for shadow, red for blood, gold for heroism, white for tragedy. You sit beneath the awning, warp threads biting at your skin, and begin the intricate pattern. Each pass of the shuttle is an exercise in survival. One misplaced weft, one slack thread, and you'll face the whip or worse. As you weave, a flock of sparrows circles overhead, chirping like fate's messengers. Children scamper by on their way to afternoon lessons, their laughter echoing off the courtyard walls. You glance up, they stare, point, whisper. That's the slave, poor creature. Their innocence galls you more than Melanie's whip. At least he shows his cruelty openly. These children, born into privilege, have never glimpsed true hardship. You steel your jaw and press onward, threading the tapestry's minotaur horn with extra care, willing yourself to ignore the world beyond the loom. By late afternoon, the tapestry's central panel emerges, Theseus's sword poised above the beast's shoulder, ready to strike. The shading's subtlety surprises you, an achievement you share with no one, for pride is a luxury for free men. Myrine inspects the work at arm's length, then strides toward you. Your skin crawls as she leans closer, her perfume a wall of floral arrogance. She snaps her fingers at Melanie's, nods toward a stray golden thread undone near Theseus's eye. He cracks his whip, and your shoulder, forcing you to kneel, wrists bound behind your back, while Marine rests her foot on your back and orders Melanie's to tighten the knot. Pain flares, you bite back a cry. Each breath twists your ribs. Sweat beads on your brow as you realize the tapestry must be flawless. You extract your bound wrist, adjust the thread, reweave the Minotaur's eye with trembling fingers. Marine's foot shifts impatiently. When you finish, she pries her shoe off your back, steps away, and pronounces the panel acceptable. You collapse onto your knees, heart pounding, legs numb. The overseer unties your hands. You rise unsteadily and retreat to the corner, limp and humiliated, stoking the dread of tomorrow's tasks. As dusk falls, you're tasked with preparing the evening's bath for Callimachus. You haul barrels of warm water from a nearby boiler room, an underground chamber where slaves stoke a fire beneath a large cauldron. The boiler's smoke-stained walls press in on you as you ladle scalding water into a shallow wooden trough. Sweat and soot coat your arms. Steam billows around your head. You balance each full bucket as if carrying liquid life itself. One misstep and your wounds and burns will renew in instant agony. Once the bath is ready, you scrub the marble floor, rinse away scald from the edges, and leave a single column of lit oil lamps around the enclosure. The door to the master's bath swings open. Callimachus's stoic form appears, water dripping from his tunic as he steps into the trough. You stand aside, awaiting his grunt of approval. When his feet meet the warm water, He sighs and calls your name, Omicron. Your heart lurches, you freeze. He beckons you forward with a single finger. You approach, every nerve screaming, and he orders you to pour more warm water from the boiler. You do so, careful not to drench him, steadying each bucket with practiced precision. He watches you with detached amusement, as though observing a trained animal. When the tub's brim fills, he waves you away. You bow back into the shadows, and the door clicks shut behind him. Your final chore is feeding the household's geese and chickens. In the pen behind the kitchen, you scatter barley and gruel scraps while fending off pecks from furious birds. A single wounded goose hisses and snaps at your ankles. You kick it aside with your boot, half fearing its flailing wing might puncture your leg. You fill ceramic dishes with water and duck as a rooster flaps overhead. Within minutes, the pen is empty and noisy, a satisfied fowl reminded of the comfort a life of captivity can bring, compared to the alternative fate faced by foreigners at the edge of the empire, destined for mines or galleys. At last, you return to the quarters as the household's torchbearers begin their rounds. You collapse onto your bench, each limb aching, your mind echoing with the day's litany. You close your eyes and the crack of Melanie's whip replays in your mind. The flare of Marine's sandal imprinted on your ribs, the hiss of the angry goose at your ankle. Children's laughter filters through the shuttered window. The stars above gleam with cold indifference. As you drift into a restless sleep, you dream of escape, of slipping away under cover of night, forging a route to Marathon or out to sea on a smuggler's ship. You imagine the taste of wind in your lungs unshackled, the smell of cypress forests instead of livestock. But every dream ends with the crack of the whip or the scrape of sandals on marble, yanking you back into the darkness. And you awaken, still Omicron, still a slave in a city that prides itself on freedom, still a silent victim within a grand democracy that cannot fathom your plight. In Part 3, we will delve into the cruel punishments reserved for the most defiant, branding, deportation to the mines, and the dreaded white cloak ceremony, and reveal the clandestine networks of solidarity where slaves whispered secrets of revolt, secret messages woven into laundry, and fleeting alliances forged in shared suffering. Until then, remember, in ancient Athens, liberty was a virtue for citizens, not a promise for everyone under its sun. By the time you stagger awake at dawn, your bruises have cooled to dull reminders of yesterday's toil. But mercy is fleeting. Today, you learn that defiance, even in the smallest act of self-preservation, carries its own sentence. Word has spread that 2 young housemaids dared to remark on Marine's faded garments, calling her past her prime. For that, Callimachus has decreed a public demonstration of discipline, and you, Omicron, have been summoned to witness how far the law will stretch against slaves who step out of line. You trudge to the Piraeus Road, where a crude wooden scaffold looms like a guillotine without a blade. A dozen slaves kneel before the magistrate's bench, each bound at wrists and ankles, heads shorn to strips of scalp. The magistrate, draped in a pristine white himation, reads aloud the charges: insolence, gossip, and improper attire commentary. The first girl, a timid baker's apprentice, is branded on the cheek with a red-hot stylus heated in a brazier's flame. Smoke curls as metal sears flesh. She screams, collapsing into a heap of twitching limbs. You avert your eyes, but you cannot escape the sound. The wet crack of flesh, the gasps between sobs, the magistrate's cold decree, let this mark remind all who wander beyond their place. Next, a weaver's boy is dragged forward. He spat at a soldier's dusty sandals last week, and now he must endure flogging, 30 lashes of a knotted leather thong. The executioner, a broad-shouldered Hellene in a stained tunic, lifts the whip and snaps it against the boy's back. His skin splits like old parchment. The smell of blood and sweat mixes with the salt in the air. The boy cries out, "Freedom is in the wind, not in these ropes." The magistrate frowns as though the sentiment offends him. "Please," he intones, "save your poetry for your next life. 5 lashes for insolence, 5 for disobedience, 5 for public disturbance, 5 for disrupting civic harmony." The boy's back reads like a city map, scarred ribs traced by crimson lines. By the time the last lash falls, you can barely stand. Melanes has stationed himself nearby, ready to haul any slave who squeals off stage. You march back to Callimachus's house in a shambled column, wrists stiff where the baker's apprentice was lashed. Marine greets you at the door, fanning herself as though the deed were simply seasoning her morning air. Her lips twitch in a smile when she sees your pallor. "Be sure today's chores are without flaw," she commands. "We wouldn't want your next lesson to be more vigorous." That afternoon, you learn of another punishment. Bird brains, they call it, for those who try to flit free. 2 runaways were caught near Pnyx Hill, having bribed a fisherman for passage to Aegina. The escapees hang now from olive trees, faces hidden in white shrouds, symbols of civic shame. Callimachus drags you to the grove behind his garden to witness their fate. The breeze stirs the cloth swathing the bodies, and you catch glimpses of torn robes, of pleading eyes beneath that pallid veil. Birds perch on the ropes above, talons curled. Athenian crows fattened on bodies like these. You swallow bile as the magistrate's scroll proclaims, "Let all see what befalls those who court rebellion." Yet even under such terror, subversion brews beneath the city's marble veneer. That evening, in the dimly lit quarters, you confer with fellow slaves, whispers exchanged like coins in the dark. There's Diodora, the tanner's daughter captured in Boeotian raids. She passes around mallow leaves whispered to dull pain. There's Laertes, a once free stonemason whose family fell to debts. He smuggles messages carved into the undersides of roof tiles hidden from overseers' eyes. And Chrysis, a Corinthian laundress who shakes off water to send warning drops onto masters' tunics, secret symbols that read O when garments dry, marking confidants across the city. They call themselves the Hidden Fist, though no one speaks of open revolt yet. Their resistance is subtler. Stolen needles to loosen seam hems, spilled oil to trip officers in the agora, hidden spikes in sandals that gouge ankles. You learn to navigate the bloodstream of this clandestine network. Meet at midnight beneath the temple of Hephaestus. Drop off morsels of barley bread baked with secret ink made from crushed olives. Bread that reads "Stand firm" when burned into the hearth. You deliver messages to slaves in the governor's household by sewing tiny scrolls into pillow seams, only to recover them on assignment, a trusted agent retrieving words of solidarity from silence. On the 5th day, you're summoned to the House of Hygiene, a clandestine gathering in a hidden courtyard off the main street. A narrow passageway opens into a grove of laurel trees, pale moonlight filtering through the leaves. There, clusters of slaves soak in steaming baths, healing wounds and sharing gossip. You join them, and as hot water scours grime from your skin, you hear whispers of a plan. The Hidden Fist contemplates a strike during the Panathenaic festival, when Athens' citizens parade through the streets in celebration of their goddess. Slaves would withhold service, disrupt the pageant's final feast, and in that momentary chaos, spirit enough tools from workshops to breach gates and press for mercy, or for power. The notion terrifies you and excites you. You picture Marine's looms snapped in half, Callimachus's amphorae shattered, the agora's marble quays clogged with overturned carts. Yet you also imagine citizens shaking in fear, bargaining with the very people they enslave. But you steel yourself with a harsh memory, the boy whose back read like a city map, the branded cheek of the baker's apprentice, the hanged runaways swaying in the breeze. Rebellion costs blood, and the Hidden Fist knows that their climb toward dawn may end in crucibles of flame. In the days that follow, you smuggle clay molds to the stonemasons' guild, embedding secret messages in the ledgers they carve of civic improvements. "We are here" is inscribed inside the foundation stones of new stoas, waiting for the festival's revelers to trample over hidden texts that might spark sympathy. You slit the wool bindings of 20 cushions in the great hall, scattering tufts of wool soaked in opium extract, enough to dull senses of Athenian patrons as they recline for symposiums. Marine curses you when dust drifts across her slippers. She wields the whip, but you draw upon Chloris's relief herb and her spool of hidden mallow leaves to soothe your wounds. Gossip's your weapon. You circulate rumors in the kitchens. The sons of Pisistratus tip gilded goats' horns with resin, planning to crown slaves as a tribute to Demeter. Citizens talk, always talk. Some scoff at you, others pause mid-handful of grapes, brows furrowed, wondering if the gods demand a reckoning. Even in Athens' democracy, where every male citizen claims a voice, the seed of fear spreads when slaves begin to speak in hushed undertones. You sense the tide shifting. Overseers glance nervously at courtyards, magistrates rubber stamp orders for more whips, but workshops receive fewer supervisors as fear of revolt distracts them. Amid this tension, nature intervenes. One evening, a sudden thunderstorm cracks across the city, sending torrents of rain cascading down pathways that channel into overflowing sewers. The storm's roar drowns the footfalls of patrols. You seize the moment, slipping through the flooded lanes to the temple of Athena Polius, where the hidden fist plans to disrupt the festival's sacred flame relay. You carry a small phial of olive oil lantern fuel mixed with naphtha, enough to smother flames and plunge the path into darkness. At dawn's first light on the festival day, you watch from behind a column as priests gather in white robes, lifting their torches high to receive the sacred flame. Citizens cheer, trumpets blare, dancers whirl, and just as the first torch is lowered into a priestess's hand, black oil bursts from hidden nozzles among the crowd, dousing torches and sending screams through the plaza. The flame sputters, guttering against the deluge of oil. Confusion reigns. Citizens hustle away, tripping over their own sandals. Elders shout invocations to Athena. Magistrates fumble for orders. In the pandemonium, you slip behind the crowd, knowing that your single act of sabotage might cost you everything, yet thrill courses through your veins. You return to the hidden courtyard, limbs shaking, heart pounding. Slaves greet you in the steam's warmth, eyes alight with the promise of change. Some clutch stolen swords pilfered from the armory. Others carry baskets of stones. The hidden fist debates. Should they seize this moment to storm the Pnyx, to blockade the Agora, to demand audience with the Archon? But restraint holds sway. Fear that too great a show of force will provoke the city's military guard, whose bronze helmets gleam even in the storm's filter. That night, you lie on your wooden bench, pulse still thundering, the echoes of torches snuffed out in your ears. You taste the rain on your lips, a sweetness mingled with soot. The revolt has begun, but you sense it's only the prelude. Tomorrow, slaves across the city will move toward key outposts, granaries, stables, shipyards, paralyzing civic life without the need for bloodshed. You steel yourself for dawn's next summons, knowing you may not survive what comes next. In Part 4, we will follow the uprising's culmination, the midnight march on the council chambers, the siege of Callimachus's estate, and the twisted bargains struck beneath the Parthenon's watchful gaze. We will bear witness to the fracture lines in Athens' democracy, and ask whether true freedom can be forged in the crucible of revolt, or whether chains once broken only give way to new forms of tyranny. Until then, remember that even the greatest polis trembled when slaves lifted their voices, and that in shadows, even the faintest whisper can ignite a revolution. Night drapes over Athens like a funeral shroud, but tonight it pulses with insurgent heartbeat. The hidden fist has mobilized every quarter of the city. Laundry workers have soaked civic banners in dung. Potters have hidden shards of broken amphorae beneath paving stones. Tannery slaves have stashed vats of acidic brine at dockyards. You, Omicron, once a single cog in Callimachus's household, now stand at the vanguard of a slave army clenching stolen pikes beneath the Parthenon's marble colonnade. Your heart thunders like war drums as you recall the taste of freedom distilled into a fig's sweetness. Tonight, fate will unchain itself. Midnight assembly at the Pnyx. Under crescent moonlight, you slip through smoldering alleyways to the Pnyx, Athens' democratic rostrum now repurposed as rebel headquarters. Hundreds of slaves gather on the terraced stone benches, rowers from the triremes, field hands from the olive groves, house servants from marble villas, each clutching makeshift weapons, iron tongs, chipped staves, sharpened pestles. Diodora, the tanner's daughter, stands atop the podium, her face ghost white beneath her cowl. She raises one fist, her voice ringing clear as a temple bell. Tonight we reclaim our names. Tonight we shatter chains. A roar explodes, echoing off the sacred hill, stirring even the cypresses. You grip your stolen pike tight. You glance left at Laertes, whose sunken eyes gleam with purpose. To your right, Chrysis grips her curved dagger, knuckles whitening. Behind you, the chorus of rasping breathing and metallic ping of weapons being tested fills the air. The plan, first, seize the council chambers on the Agora's west side to incapacitate the magistrates. Second, storm Callimachus's estate, symbol of private tyranny, and burn his ledger of unpaid levies. Third, block all entry points to the city to force negotiations at spear point. It sounds mad. Athens' walls bristle with hoplites, and citizen volunteers guard every gate. Yet the element of surprise is your secret weapon. The council chambers seized. At the first toll of the temple bell, half the force spills down the winding steps of the Pnyx toward the agora. You move as one shadowed tide, slipping past uncleared sluice ditches and hastily barred gates, guided by smuggled copies of city plans drawn in soot on clay shards. 2 hoplite guards at the chamber's grand bronze doors are your first obstacle. They stand vigilant, spears outward, helms low. A group of laundry workers, Chrysis among them, rushes forward, hurling steaming buckets of urine-tainted washwater. The guards slip, grunt, and stagger, their shields rattling as they struggle to maintain footing. In that instant, Diodora's squad flips the heavy doors inward, and the iron clang echoes through deserted marble halls. Inside, torches flicker on mosaic floors depicting gods in heroic poses, mocking ghosts overshadowed by your insurgent boots. A dozen magistrates, roused from vino-fueled slumber, scramble from their poofs, toga sleeves twisted. They gape as you and your comrades storm the dais, overturning benches and smashing silver inkstands. You seize the council records, scrolls that define slave codes and taxation, and hurl them into the torches, watching precious papyrus curl with protest, stars of flame blossoming against the marble. A magistrate lunges at you, but Laertes parries his thrust with a sharpened stylus, sending the man crashing into a pile of overturned ledger tables. The shock resounds through the city. Even the gods know. Athens' democracy is bleeding. Storming Callimachus' villa, with the council chambers in chaos, you sprint north, past the fish market stench and the clatter of startled merchants. Lanterns flick and gutter as you slip through unguarded back alleys. At last, Callimachus' villa comes into view, a squat, walled compound planted with cypress trees, its painted stucco gleaming faintly in torchlight. Over the gate, a bronze plaque reads, Callimachus, Hoplite and Citizen. You hook a crowbar to the iron latch, yank. It resists, yank again, and the gate surrenders, groaning on its hinges. Your heart clenches. This is the lair of brutality and oppression, the birthplace of your name, Omicron. Inside, slaves turned rebels fan out like a spring flood. You hear muffled cries, Callimachus' guards sealing their towers, but they are few and untrained. Chrysis releases a basket of torches soaked in oil and naphtha. The wooden screens behind the main atrium erupt in orange tongues. Smoke swallows the courtyard as you and Diodora burst into Callimachus' study. Tall oak shelves bowed with scrolls, ledgers bound in leather straps, a golden inkwell precariously perched on the master's desk. You seize the largest ledger, its covers stamped with your brand, and toss it into the fire. The leather crackles, pages curl, and knowledge of servitude transforms into ashes drifting toward the ceiling dome. A shout, "To the rooftops!" You scramble up narrow stone stairs, passing thrashing guards left behind for Diodora's group. Reaching the tiled roof, you join dozens of rebels bringing stringed lanterns to bear on gleaming marble statues, symbols of aristocratic lineage. Shards of smashed pottery, hidden by tanner apprentices, have been scattered on the lead sheeting. Any guard foolish enough to pursue will find his soul sliced. Below, calloused hands pull down drapery and toss it into burning braziers, setting the colonnade alight. Callimachus was a proud man. Tonight he will watch his pride burn. The siege of the gates. With the villa aflame, you descend into the streets just as city's bells begin tolling alarm. Spargate hoplites rush toward the conflagration, shields upraised, their polished breastplates catching firelight. But the city's gates, Keramakos to the west and Dipylon to the north, are already contested. Farmers and exiled artisans have blocked the roads with overturned carts and barrels of boiling oil. You sprint alongside a jerry-rigged battering ram, an oak beam wedged in a cart, aimed at the Dipylon gate's iron portcullis. You lash yourself to its side, hefting your pike like a striker at the ready. At the first impact, the ram jolts, bricks fall, and hoplites charge. Arrows zing from the rooftops above. Your comrades, perched behind battlements looted from the fort's armory. The gate's iron bars groan, then splinter. With a final crash, the barrier gives, and you pour through the breach. Civilians on the other side gape in shock, some cheering, others seeking cover. Inside the city, you find more rebels dashing flasks of pitch onto pearls of grease scattered across the cobblestones, slick traps for cavalry. Horses skid and crash. Riders curse as they slide onto streets slick as mirrors. You raise your pike to the sky and shout, "For freedom!" The cry reverberates off the walls, a war song for slaves echoing Athens' own hymnal. Negotiations. Among the ruins, hour by hour, the city tilts awkwardly. Pillars collapse under a conflagration. Agora stalls lie overturned. Citizen blood mingles with slave blood in the gutters. From within the council chambers' upper gallery, a blazing ruin. Two white-robed archons step into the courtyard, hands raised in cautious peace. They carry no spears, only scrolls and olive branches. Diodora and Laertes flank them, urging them forward. You, Omicron, wrestle with disbelief. These relics of democracy are offering parley. The archons speak, Athenians and those who serve them. For the first time, we acknowledge that our greatness is hollow if built on the bones of others. Let us convene under truce, here, in the heart of the agora. Let slaves speak their grievances. A murmur ripples through your ranks, shock, laughter, and the unspoken question, will they truly listen? You consider the young baker's apprentice, scarred cheek brand shining even in smoke. You see the tanner's daughter, Diodora, arms still slick with soot, eyes ablaze. You step forward, pike lowered, and speak a single sentence that rises above the crackle of burning wood. We demand our names. A hush falls. The archons, and even some petrified hoplites, nod. They extend pergamena scrolls bound with strips of linen, proposals for emancipation in exchange for service on citizen militias, protective laws against abuse, and oversight councils including former slaves. Citizens clutch their togas, unsure if victory or dismay awaits. You realize this moment may be Baghdad's, freedom carved from tyranny through blood and fire, its future uncertain as a candle drifting in the Aegean breeze. Aftermath in New Chain's mourning finds Athens scarred but standing. Flames have consumed half the Nyx's wooden stage, the agora's porticos lie toppled, and Callimachus's villa is a smoldering ruin. Yet no further blood flows. Hesitantly, aristocratic hoplites begin extinguishing fires alongside their once servants. Bandages pass from one hand to another, water urns shared. The city's triremes lie idle in the Piraeus harbor, their oars stilled by rebellion's echo. The archons, seated beneath the Parthenon's colonnade, some columns chipped, some blackened, read aloud the new decree. All slaves who participated in the uprising shall receive individual citizenship pledges, land plots in allotment, and first, refusal on municipal labor contracts. Those grievously harmed will be granted compensation. Henceforth, Athens stands as beacon of true democracy. You, Omicron, receive your pledge, your name carved onto the civic rolls during a ceremony in the Eleusinian gardens. A magistrate, once your tormentor, places a wreath of olive leaves on your head. You taste the bitterness of morning air, seasoned with ash and hope. You clutch your freed wrist, no brand, no iron, though your back still aches with the memory of the flog. In this new order, you stand alongside the citizens you once could not see, some offering cautious nods of apology, others averting their gazes as though freedom were contagious. Yet as speeches fade and the citizenry disperses, you glance at the scorched columns and the charred frescoes depicting war gods and athletes. A question lingers. Will this hard-won liberty be anything more than fresh chains painted gold? Will new magistrates brand others in your stead? Will the land grants turn to backroom deals? The first refusal rights dissolve into bureaucracy? You can only hope and watch. Epilogue. The light of Athens. At last years later, you walk the restored streets of Athens as a full citizen. Pike replaced by plow, insurrection replaced by council duties. You plant vines in your allotted plot. You debate in the agora on equitability of water rights. You attend symposiums as an equal, sharing wine poured from pots you possess. Children ask for tales of the uprising. You tell them of midnight trumpets, smoldering gates, and the moment when slaves, denied rights, refused to be silent. They listen wide-eyed, clutching wooden toys shaped like pikes and amphorae. Yet sometimes, when dusk's golden glow strikes the Parthenon's marble, you recall the snap of the whip, the crack of the stylus, the hush that followed Diodora's plea. You remember the spark in Laertes' eye as he loosed messages carved in stone. You feel the pulse of collective rage that shook the pillars of democracy itself, demanding to be seen, to speak, to be named, and you understand that freedom, athletic, lofty, visceral, demands vigilance as fierce as any rebellion. Chains may be broken and citizenship granted, but the soul of liberty lies in the will to remember injustice and to stand guard against new forms of oppression. In this way, Athens endures, a city built on the paradox of democracy and slavery, of brutal whip-crack and later olive branch. Its marble temples gleam not because of untouched stone, but because once, in a night of fire and blood, slaves seized their names and reshaped the city's destiny. And as you, Omicron, your name restored at last, walk beneath columns still bearing the soot of revolt, you carry within you the truth that liberty is both a gift and a battle cry, forever echoing through time. When Zeke describes the scene in Sacramento, where Chinese laborers were robbed by vigilantes and local courts turned blind eyes, a hush fell,